Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's story, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe to support us. Also, leave a comment letting me know which city you're watching from. Now let's get into the case. The morning air felt crisp against Sarah Johnson's face as she slid her kayak into the still waters of Lake Vermilion. The sun had barely crested the tree line, casting long shadows across the glassy surface and painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. At 34, Sarah had been kayaking these northern Minnesota waters for nearly 5 years, ever since she'd relocated from Minneapolis to the smaller community of Ely to take a position as an environmental science teacher at the local high school. The move had been prompted by a desire for something different after her divorce, a chance to reconnect with nature and rebuild her life away from the reminders of her failed marriage. Sarah adjusted the straps of her life vest and secured her small waterproof bag containing her phone, car keys, and a granola bar. She'd planned this solo morning paddle for days, eager to explore the eastern arm of the lake that she hadn't yet visited. The forecast promised clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect conditions for a few hours on the water before the weekend tourists arrived with their motorboats and jet skis, disturbing the tranquility she sought. With practiced strokes, Sarah guided her kayak across the water, her paddle dipping rhythmically into the lake. Her red and white vessel, a gift to herself on her 32nd birthday, cut through the water with minimal resistance. The early morning solitude enveloped her, broken only by the occasional call of a loon or the splash of a fish breaking the surface. This was why she had moved here, she reminded herself. These moments of perfect communion with nature made the smaller paycheck and limited social life worthwhile. Her route took her along the shoreline, where towering pines and spruce trees crowded the water's edge. Their reflection created a seamless mirror image in the calm water, an illusion of an endless forest extending below the surface. Sarah paused occasionally to take photos with her phone, carefully removing it from its waterproof case and capturing the mist rising off the water, the silhouette of an eagle soaring overhead, or a particularly striking arrangement of rocks and trees. Her Instagram followers, mostly former students and fellow outdoor enthusiasts, would appreciate these glimpses of northern Minnesota's pristine wilderness. After about an hour of steady paddling, Sarah rounded a small peninsula and discovered a secluded cove she hadn't explored before. The shoreline curved gently inward, creating a natural harbor protected from the winds that sometimes whipped across the more exposed parts of the lake. A small sandy beach, unusual for the predominantly rocky shoreline of Lake Vermilion, extended from the water's edge to a grassy clearing that eventually gave way to the dense forest. It was perfect for a short break, she decided, steering her kayak toward the beach. The bottom of her kayak scraped against the sandy lake bed as she approached the shore. Sarah leaned forward, preparing to disembark, when movement at the forest's edge caught her attention. She squinted against the morning light, her hand instinctively shielding her eyes from the glare reflecting off the water. What she had initially mistaken for a shadow among the trees shifted again, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. A black bear emerged from the forest, its dark fur glistening in the sunlight. It was larger than Sarah had expected. She estimated it stood about 5 feet tall on all fours, with a substantial girth that suggested it had been feeding well as summer transitioned into early fall. The bear moved with a ponderous grace, its head swinging from side to side as it ambled toward the water's edge, perhaps 20 yards from where Sarah's kayak now floated in the shallows. Sarah had lived in bear country long enough to know the basics. Black bears were generally shy and avoided human contact when possible. They were omnivores, more likely to feast on berries and fish than to show any interest in humans. Nevertheless, her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the animal approach the shoreline. She'd seen bears before, usually from the safety of her car or at a significant distance during hikes, but never this close, never when she was so vulnerable on the water. The rational part of her brain assessed the situation. She should back away quietly, return to the open water and find another spot to land. Black bears rarely swam far from shore, so maintaining a safe distance on the water would be the prudent course of action. Sarah began to paddle backward, careful to make as little noise as possible, not wanting to startle the bear or draw its attention. But the bear had already noticed her. It paused at the water's edge, its small eyes fixed on the red and white. Kaya. For a moment, they regarded each other, woman and bear, in a silent standoff across 15 yards of shallow water. Sarah held her breath, her paddle suspended above the surface, dripping water in a steady patter that seemed thunderous in the morning quiet. The bear sniffed the air, its black nose working to capture her scent. Sarah knew that bears had poor eyesight, but excellent olfactory senses. Whatever it smelled, perhaps the lingering aroma of the coffee she'd drunk before setting out, or the granola bar in her dry bag, seemed to pique its interest. The bear took a step into the water, then another, its massive paws splashing in the shallows. "Hey!" Sarah called out, her voice startlingly loud in the stillness. Bear safety guidelines recommended making noise to scare away curious bears. "Hey bear, go away!" She smacked her paddle against the water's surface, creating a series of loud splashes. The bear paused, seeming startled by the sudden noise. It rose slightly on its hind legs, giving Sarah a better view of its impressive size. She estimated it weighed at least 300 pounds, not the largest black bear in Minnesota, but substantial enough to cause serious harm if it chose to. The bear dropped back to all fours and huffed, a sound that carried clearly across the water. Sarah's mind raced. The bear was between her and her planned exit point, effectively blocking her access to the beach. She could try to paddle around the cove to find another landing spot, but the shoreline grew rockier in both directions, making beaching her kayak difficult, if not impossible. The next established access point was at least 2 miles back the way she had come. She had planned to rest here before continuing her exploration, but now that seemed impossible. She considered her options, still maintaining her position about 15 yards offshore. The bear seemed curious rather than aggressive, which was typical for black bears. Perhaps if she waited, it would lose interest and wander back into the forest in search of more promising food sources. Or she could try to maneuver around to another part of the cove, giving the bear a wide berth. As she deliberated, the bear made its own decision. It moved along the shoreline, entering the water up to its shoulders, and began swimming. Sarah's pulse quickened as she realized it was swimming directly toward her. Black bears were accomplished swimmers, capable of maintaining a speed of approximately 3 miles per hour in the water, slower than their land speed, but still faster than she could paddle in her recreational kayak. "No, go away!" Sarah shouted, her voice rising with panic. She thrust her paddle into the water, executing a quick turning stroke to point her kayak back toward the open lake. As she began paddling away, she heard the splash of the bear's powerful strokes behind her. A glance over her shoulder confirmed her fears. The bear had committed to following her, closing the distance between them with alarming speed. Sarah's arms burned as she paddled with all her strength, driving the kayak forward. But the bear, now fully committed to the chase, continued to gain on her. She didn't understand why it was pursuing her. Black bears rarely chased humans without provocation, but the reason hardly mattered now. The immediate danger demanded all her attention. Within minutes, the bear had closed to within a few yards of her kayak. Sarah could hear its heavy breathing, the splash of its powerful paws churning through the water. In a desperate attempt to deter it, she swung her paddle toward the bear, hoping to startle it without actually making contact. The sudden movement seemed to agitate the animal further. It lunged forward, its paw connecting with the side of her kayak with enough force to rock the small vessel violently. Sarah struggled to maintain her balance as the kayak wobbled precariously. The bear circled, then charged again, this time striking the stern of the kayak. The impact spun her craft 90 degrees and nearly capsized it. Water sloshed over the sides, soaking her shorts and the bottom of her t-shirt. Sarah fought to right herself, but the bear was relentless, attacking the kayak from different angles as if trying to determine the best approach. On the third charge, the bear's weight and momentum struck the kayak broadside. Sarah felt the world tilt as her vessel rolled, dumping her unceremoniously into the lake. The water, still chilled from the cool night, shocked her system. She surfaced, gasping, to find her kayak floating upside down a few feet away, and the bear now alarmingly close enough that she could see water beading on its dense fur and the whites of its small eyes. Sarah knew that trying to reclaim her kayak would only bring her closer to the bear. Instead, she began swimming backward toward the shore, keeping her eyes on the animal. The bear, seemingly satisfied with having displaced her from the kayak, turned its attention to the vessel itself. It pawed at the overturned hull, perhaps confused by this strange red and white object that now floated passively in the water. Taking advantage of the bear's momentary distraction, Sarah swam more vigorously toward the shore, angling away from where the bear had first emerged from the forest. Her feet soon found purchase on the lake bottom, and she began wading backward, unwilling to turn her back on the bear. The animal, having lost interest in the kayak, noticed her movement and changed course, swimming directly toward her once more. Sarah's heart sank as she realized she wouldn't reach the shore before the bear reached her. In chest-deep water she couldn't run, and swimming would only slow her further. As the bear closed the final distance between them, Sarah made a split-second decision. Taking a deep breath, she ducked beneath the surface and swam several powerful strokes underwater, changing her angle of approach to the shore. When she resurfaced, she had gained perhaps 10 yards of separation from the bear, which seemed momentarily confused by her disappearance, but her advantage was short-lived. The bear spotted her again and adjusted its course. Sarah reached water, shallow enough to stand in about thigh-deep, and began to splash and shout, hoping to intimidate the animal. "Get away, go on, get out of here." Her voice cracked with fear as she slapped the water's surface hard with her open palms, creating explosions of spray. The bear hesitated, seeming startled by her aggressive display. It stopped swimming and stood upright in the water, its head and upper body fully exposed. For a moment, Sarah thought her tactic had worked, that the bear would retreat and leave her to make her escape to shore. Then the animal dropped back to all fours and charged. Water sprayed in all directions as the bear closed the final distance between them with frightening speed. Sarah turned to run, but the resistance of the water slowed her movements. She had barely taken 2 steps when she felt an impact against her back that sent her sprawling forward into the shallow water. Sarah's face hit the sandy lake bottom, the impact disorienting her momentarily. She flailed, desperate to regain her footing to escape the weight that now pressed against her back. The bear's breath was hot against her neck, its weight crushing her against the lake bottom. Panic flooded her system as she realized she was pinned face down in shallow water, the risk of drowning now as immediate as the threat from the bear's teeth and claws. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, Sarah pushed upward, managing to lift her face above the water's surface. She gasped for air, water streaming from her hair and face. The bear shifted its weight, and Sarah seized the opportunity to roll onto her back, facing the predator that had her pinned in the shallows. The bear's face was inches from hers, its mouth open to reveal yellowed teeth. The smell of its breath, fishy and rank, filled her nostrils. In that moment, Sarah was certain she was going to die. All the safety advice she'd read about playing dead during bear attacks fled her mind, replaced by a primal instinct to fight for her life. She struck out blindly, her right fist connecting with the bear's sensitive nose. The animal recoiled slightly, giving Sarah enough space to draw her knees up between them. With all her strength, she kicked upward, driving both feet into the bear's chest. The impact pushed the animal back just enough for Sarah to scramble backward in the shallow water, but the bear recovered quickly. It lunged forward, its powerful jaws closing around Sarah's left forearm. Pain exploded through her body as the bear's teeth penetrated her flesh. She screamed, the sound echoing across the cove, bouncing back from the surrounding forest. With her right hand, she pounded against the bear's head, aiming for its eyes, but the animal seemed impervious to her blows. The bear shook its head violently, treating her arm like a rag doll. Sarah felt the sickening sensation of tissue tearing beneath her skin. She stopped fighting and instead tried to move with the bear's motions, minimizing the damage to her arm. The water around them had turned pink with her blood, the sight of it heightening her terror. Just as suddenly as it had attacked, the bear released her arm. It backed away slightly, as if assessing this strange creature that still fought back despite being injured. Sarah clutched her wounded arm against her chest, blood seeping between her fingers. The pain was intense, radiating from her forearm to her shoulder. The bear circled her, splashing in the shallows, its behavior unpredictable. Sarah remained frozen in place, afraid that any movement would trigger another attack. Her mind raced, trying to recall anything that might help her survive this encounter. Black bears weren't typically aggressive toward humans unless they felt threatened or were protecting cubs or food sources. Had she inadvertently come between a mother and her cubs? But she hadn't seen any cubs, and it was late in the season for them to be very young. Whatever the reason for the bear's unusual aggression, Sarah knew she needed to get away from the water and find help. Her arm was bleeding profusely, and she felt lightheaded, whether from blood loss, pain, or simple terror, she couldn't tell. The shore was tantalizingly close, perhaps 15 feet away, but the bear still stood between her and safety. As if sensing her thoughts, the bear charged again. This time, Sarah had no chance to evade. The impact knocked her backward into deeper water, and she struggled to stay upright. The bear's claws raked across her right shoulder and chest, tearing through her life vest and the t-shirt beneath. Fresh pain bloomed across her torso as the bear's weight pushed her under the water once more. Underwater, with her lungs burning for air and the bear's weight pressing down on her, Sarah's survival instinct took over. She drove her right thumb into what she hoped was the bear's eye. The animal jerked back, allowing Sarah to surface. She gasped for air, coughing and sputtering as water ran from her nose and mouth. The bear shook its head, pawing at its face where Sarah had jabbed it. It huffed and grunted, clearly agitated. Sarah didn't wait to see what it would do next. She began moving toward the shore, keeping her eyes on the bear while attempting to put distance between them. Her left arm hung uselessly at her side, too, painful to move, while her right hand pressed against the wounds on her chest, trying to stem the bleeding. The bear followed, maintaining a distance of a few feet, as if wary of another attack on its eye. Sarah continued her slow backward retreat toward the shoreline, each step bringing her closer to solid ground where she might have a better chance of escaping. A sudden sound broke the tension, the distant whine of an outboard motor. Sarah's heart leaped with hope. There were other people on the lake, potentially close enough to help. She opened her mouth to scream for help, but before she could make a sound, the bear lunged forward once more. This time, its massive paw struck her across the face, the claws leaving burning trails of pain from her left temple to her jaw. The force of the blow knocked Sarah sideways, and she fell into the water again. Disoriented and in agony, she struggled to regain her footing. The world spun around her, the morning sunlight fracturing into dazzling patterns as water filled her eyes. The sound of the motor grew louder, and Sarah heard voices, distant but approaching. With a final surge of strength, she screamed, "Help! Bear, help me!" Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distorted by pain and fear. The bear, startled by her sudden vocalization, or perhaps by the approaching boat, backed away several steps. It stood upright in the water, its full height revealed as it surveyed its surroundings. Sarah could see blood, her blood, staining its muzzle and front paws. The motor sound changed pitch as whoever was piloting the boat opened the throttle, the craft now moving quickly in her direction. The bear dropped back to all fours and looked from Sarah to the approaching sound, seemingly weighing its options. Then, with surprising speed, it turned and swam away from her, heading toward the far end of the cove. Sarah watched it go, hardly daring to believe that the attack was over. Her entire body throbbed with pain, and she could feel blood flowing from multiple wounds. She tried to stand fully upright, but found her legs unwilling to support her weight. Instead, she sank to her knees in the shallow water, the lake now, waist-deep around her kneeling form. The fishing boat, a small aluminum craft with an outboard motor, rounded the point of the cove and came into view. Two men sat inside, one steering while the other pointed in Sarah's direction. She raised her right arm weakly, trying to signal them. "Help!" she called, but her voice came out as little more than a whisper, her strength rapidly fading. The men saw her nonetheless. The driver cut the engine and coasted the final distance to where Sarah knelt in the blood-stained water. "Jesus Christ!" one of them exclaimed as they drew close enough to see her injuries. "What happened to you, lady?" "Bear," Sarah managed, her voice strengthening slightly now that help had arrived. "It attacked me. My kayak." She gestured vaguely toward her overturned craft, still floating where the bear had left it. "Don, call 911, the first man directed his companion as he leaned over the side of the boat. "Ma'am, can you stand? We need to get you into the boat." Sarah tried again to rise but found herself unable to coordinate her movements. The pain in her arm and shoulder had become a strange, detached throbbing, and she felt unnaturally cold, despite the morning sun warming the air around them. With a clarity that seemed odd given the circumstances, she recognized the symptoms of shock setting in. "I don't think I can," she admitted. "My arm and I can't use it." The two men exchanged glances. "I'm going in," the first one decided, kicking off his shoes. "Don, keep trying to get through to 911. Reception's spotty out. Here." He slipped over the side of the boat and waded towards Sarah, moving carefully in the unfamiliar waters. When he reached her, he hooked his arms beneath hers, being careful of her injured left arm. "This is going to hurt," he warned her, "but we need to get you out of the water and into the boat. Ready? On three. 1, 2, 3. He lifted, and pain lanced through Sarah's body. A cry escaped her lips, but she bit down hard, trying to cooperate as best she could. Together, they managed to get her to the boat, where Don reached down to help pull her aboard. The process was agonizing, each movement sending fresh waves of pain through her injured arm and shoulder. By the time they had her settled on the floor of the aluminum craft, Sarah was breathing in short, sharp gasps, fighting against the darkness that threatened to overwhelm her vision. I got through, Don announced, tucking his phone into his pocket. Emergency services are dispatching an ambulance to the landing at Wolf Bay. They're also sending a sheriff's boat, but that'll take longer to reach us. Wolf Bay's about 10 minutes from here at full throttle. The first man, Sarah, still didn't know his name, informed her as he climbed back into the boat. You hang in there, okay? I'm Mike, by the way, and this is my brother Don. We're going to get you to help. Sarah, she managed, feeling it was important they know her name, though she couldn't articulate why. Sarah Johnson. Nice to meet you, Sarah, Mike said, his tone gently ironic given the circumstances. He stripped off his flannel shirt and folded it into a pad, which he pressed against the worst of the lacerations on her chest. Hold this here if you can, he instructed, guiding her right hand to the makeshift bandage. It'll help slow the bleeding until we get you to the paramedics. Don had retrieved a small first aid kit from beneath his seat and was now opening it with shaking hands. I've got some gauze pads and bandages, he said, but this is pretty basic stuff, more for fish hooks and small cuts. Do what you can, Mike directed. I'm going to get us moving. He returned to the stern and restarted the outboard motor. The sudden noise made Sarah flinch, her nerves still raw from the bear attack. While Mike navigated the boat back toward the main body of the lake, Don knelt beside Sarah, doing his best to clean and bandage her wounds with the limited supplies available. The bear really did a number on you, he commented, his face pale beneath his fishing cap. What were you doing out here alone? Kayaking, Sarah replied, her voice stronger now that the immediate danger had passed. The shock was still there, making her feel oddly disconnected from her body, but the presence of other humans provided a lifeline to hold on to. I do it all the time. Never had trouble before. Black bear? Don asked as he wrapped a gauze pad around a deep gash on her forearm, careful to avoid the puncture wounds from the bear's teeth. Sarah nodded. Big one. It came out of nowhere. I tried to back away, but it followed me into the water. That's unusual behavior, Mike called over the sound of the motor. Black bears don't typically go after people unless they're provoked or protecting something. You didn't get between Mama and her cubs, did you? Didn't see any cubs, Sarah replied, wincing as Don secured the bandage with a strip of adhesive. Tape. It just attacked like it was angry that I was there. Could have had a food cache nearby, Don suggested. They get territorial about their feeding spots, especially this time of year when they're fattening up for winter. Sarah hadn't considered that possibility. She'd been so focused on escape and survival that the bear's motivation hadn't seemed relevant. Now, with the immediate danger behind her, she found herself curious about what had triggered such an aggressive response from an animal that was typically shy around humans. The boat rounded a small island, and the expanse of Lake Vermilion opened up before them. Mike increased their speed, the little aluminum craft bouncing across the small waves that had begun to form as the wind picked up. Each impact sent jolts of pain through Sarah's injured body, but she clenched her teeth and endured it, knowing that faster travel meant earlier medical attention. Almost there, Mike assured her, as they passed a familiar landmark, a distinctive rock formation that local boaters used as a navigation guide. The landing is just around that next point. The ambulance should be waiting. Sarah nodded, too exhausted to speak. The adrenaline that had sustained her during the attack and immediate aftermath was subsiding, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that made it difficult to keep her eyes open. She focused on her breathing, trying to stay conscious by counting each inhalation and exhalation. She'd reached 27 when the boat began to slow, the motor throttling down as they approached the landing. Through half-lidded eyes, Sarah saw the wooden dock of the public access point coming into view. An ambulance was indeed waiting, its red and white lights flashing silently in the morning sunlight. 2 paramedics stood at the ready, and a sheriff's deputy was speaking with what appeared to be a park ranger in the distinctive uniform of the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. Mike guided the boat alongside the dock with practiced ease. The paramedics immediately moved to the edge, ready to assist. Bear attack victim, Mike called to them as Don secured the boat. Multiple lacerations to the arm, chest, and face. Possible puncture wounds from teeth. She's lost a fair amount of blood. The female paramedic nodded crisply. We'll take it from here. Can you help us get her onto the dock? The transfer from boat to dock was another exercise in pain management for Sarah. Despite the gentle hands of the paramedics and the fishermen, every movement aggravated her injuries. By the time they had her on the stretcher, she was sweating profusely, her shirt sticking to her skin where it wasn't torn away. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" the male paramedic asked as they wheeled her toward the waiting ambulance. "Sarah Johnson," she replied, her voice thin with pain. "Good, Sarah. I'm paramedic Reynolds, and this is my partner, paramedic Chen. We're going to take care of you." Okay, can you tell me where you're hurt? Sarah almost laughed at the question. Where wasn't she hurt? But she understood they needed to prioritize their care. Left arm is the worst. Bear had it in its mouth, chest and right shoulder from its claws. Face too. I think it hit me with its paw. Paramedic Chen was already cutting away the remains of Sarah's life vest and t-shirt to better access her wounds. These are going to need proper cleaning at the hospital, she commented. Animal bites have a high risk of infection. BP is 100/60, Reynolds reported, removing the blood pressure cuff from Sarah's right arm. Pulse 110 and thready, mild to moderate hypovolemic shock. He reached for an IV kit. Sarah, I'm going to start an IV to give you some fluids. Okay, you've lost some blood and this will help stabilize your pressure. Sarah nodded her understanding, too tired to speak unless absolutely necessary. The needle stick in her right arm was barely noticeable compared to the throbbing agony of her other injuries. Once the IV was secured, Reynolds injected something into the line. That's some pain medication, he explained. Not enough to knock you out, but it should take the edge off until we get you to the ER. The sheriff's deputy approached as the paramedics prepared to load Sarah into the ambulance. Ma'am, I'm Deputy Collins with the St. Louis County Sheriff's Department. I know you're in a lot of pain, but I need to ask you a few questions about what happened. Sarah nodded wearily. The pain medication was beginning to work, creating a slight buffer between her and the worst of the agony. Can you tell me where the attack took place? Deputy Collins asked, notepad at the ready. Sarah described the location as best she could, mentioning the small cove with the sandy beach on the eastern arm of Lake Vermilion. Mike, who had followed them from the dock, offered to provide more specific directions if needed. And you're certain it was a black bear, the deputy continued, not a brown bear or grizzly. It was black, Sarah confirmed. Definitely a black bear. No hump on its shoulders like a grizzly would have. All black. Fur maybe 5 feet tall on all fours. The DNR ranger had joined them now, his expression concerned. That's unusually aggressive behavior for a black bear, he noted. They typically avoid confrontation with humans. Did you have food with you? Perhaps something that might have attracted it? Just a granola bar in my dry bag, Sarah replied. It was sealed. The bag was attached to my kayak. And the bear, can you describe its behavior before it attacked? Did it seem sick or injured in any way? Sarah tried to recall details beyond the blur of fear and pain. It seemed normal, I guess. Healthy. It wasn't limping or acting strangely. Until it saw me. Then it just came after me, followed me into the water. The ranger exchanged glances with Deputy Collins. We'll need to locate this bear, he said. If it's exhibiting predatory behavior toward humans, it poses a significant public safety risk. My kayak, Sarah remembered suddenly. It's still out there, red and white perception. It was overturned in the cove. We'll find it, Deputy Collins assured her. Don't worry about that now. The rangers will organize a search for the bear, and we'll recover your kayak if possible. We need to get her to the hospital, Paramedic Chen interjected firmly. These questions can wait until she's been treated. The deputy nodded, stepping back. Of course, ma'am, we'll need a full statement later, but for now, focus on getting better. Mike stepped forward before the paramedics could close the ambulance doors. Sarah, we'll make sure your kayak gets back to you. Is there someone we should call for you, family or friends? Sarah thought briefly of her parents in Iowa, her brother in California, but she didn't want them to worry, not when there was nothing they could do from so far away. My neighbor, she decided. Elaine Winters. She has a key to my house. Her number's in my phone if you can find it. It was in my dry bag attached to the kayak. We'll look for it, Mike promised. And if we can't find it, we'll check with the school. Someone there should have your emergency contacts. Sarah managed a weak smile. Thank you, both of you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. Just glad we were there, Don said, speaking for the first time since they'd reached the landing. We don't usually fish that cove, but Mike had a feeling about it this morning. Thank God for that feeling, Sarah murmured, her eyes growing heavy as the medication took greater effect. Okay, we need to move now, Reynolds announced, preparing to close the ambulance doors. The nearest trauma center is in Duluth, about an hour and a half away. We're going to transport you to the local clinic first for stabilization, then they'll decide whether to airlift you to St. Mary's in Duluth or treat you locally. Sarah nodded her understanding, too drained to form words. The doors closed and the ambulance began to move, its siren wailing as it accelerated away from the landing. Through the small windows in the rear doors, Sarah caught a final glimpse of Mike and Don standing beside Deputy Collins and the ranger, their faces somber as they watched the ambulance depart. Inside the vehicle, the paramedics worked efficiently, cleaning her wounds as best they could with the supplies on hand and applying proper pressure bandages to control the bleeding. The pain medication made it easier to bear their ministrations, though certain movements still elicited gasps and winces. "You're doing great, Sarah," Chen encouraged her, securing a bandage around her lacerated shoulder. "We'll be at the clinic in about 20 minutes. They'll have better pain management options there, and they can properly clean and assess these wounds." Sarah nodded, focusing on her breathing to manage the pain that the medication couldn't entirely mask. Her thoughts drifted to the bear, wondering where it had gone after swimming away from her. Was it still in the area, perhaps posing a danger to other kayakers or hikers? Or had it retreated deep into the forest, the encounter with her merely an anomaly in its otherwise reclusive existence? The ambulance hit a pothole, jolting Sarah back to the present moment with a fresh wave of pain. She gasped, her right hand instinctively reaching for the safety bar alongside the stretcher. "Sorry about that," Reynolds apologized from the driver's seat. "These back roads aren't exactly well maintained." "It's okay," Sarah managed, though her arm throbbed anew from the sudden movement. "I've complained about the roads myself." "Local?" Chen asked, as she checked the flow rate on Sarah's IV. 5 years now," Sarah confirmed. "I teach at the high school in Ely, environmental science. So you probably know more about bears than most people around here," Chen observed with a small smile. Sarah's laugh came out as more of a pained huff, apparently not enough to avoid getting attacked by one. "Black bear attacks are extremely rare," Chen said reassuringly. "You just had the bad luck to encounter an unusually aggressive individual. Most black bears want nothing to do with humans." "That's what I always taught my students," Sarah agreed, her voice fading as fatigue washed over her again. "Give bears space. Make noise on trails. Carry bear spray if you're in an area with known activity." "All good advice," Chen agreed, "even if it didn't help you today. Sometimes, despite taking all the right precautions, bad things still happen." Sarah nodded, slightly her eyes drifting closed. The motion of the ambulance, the subtle effects of the pain medication, and the sheer emotional and physical exhaustion of the ordeal conspired to pull her toward unconsciousness. She fought it briefly, then surrendered, letting the darkness claim her. She awakened to bright fluorescent lights and the beeping of medical monitors. For a moment, Sarah couldn't remember where she was or why her body ached so terribly. Then the memories flooded back. The bear, the attack, the rescue by the fisherman. "Miss Johnson?" A woman in a white coat approached the bed. "I'm Dr. Matthews. You're at the Ely Regional Health Center. Do you remember what happened?" "To you?" Sarah nodded, her mouth dry. "Bear attack," she rasped. "On Lake Vermilion." "That's right." Dr. Matthews checked the monitors beside Sarah's bed. "You lost consciousness in the ambulance, but your vital signs have stabilized. We've cleaned your wounds and administered antibiotics to prevent infection. The bear's teeth and claws introduced a lot of bacteria into your system, so we're being aggressive with the antibiotic regimen." Sarah attempted to sit up, but found her left arm immobilized in a sling and her torso wrapped in bandages. Pain flared across her chest and shoulder, and she sank back against the pillows with a wince. "Try not to move too much," Dr. Matthews advised. "You have multiple lacerations on your chest, shoulder, and face, as well as puncture wounds on your left forearm where the bear bit you. The good news is that no major arteries were compromised, and the muscle damage, while significant, should heal given time and proper physiotherapy." Sarah's right hand moved to her face, encountering a bandage that covered her left cheek and extended up toward her temple. "How bad is it?" she asked, dreading the answer. Dr. Matthews' expression was compassionate but honest. "The facial lacerations were deep but clean. Dr. Patel, our surgeon, closed them with 42 stitches. There will be scarring, but once the wounds have healed completely, we can refer you to a plastic surgeon to minimize the appearance of the scars if you wish." 42 stitches on her face alone. Sarah tried to process this information, but her mind seemed to be working in slow motion, perhaps due to the pain medication flowing through her system. "And my arm?" she asked. "The bite wounds were our primary concern," Dr. Matthews explained. "Bear bites can cause significant crush injuries, along with the puncture wounds themselves. We've cleaned them thoroughly and closed what we could, but some areas need to remain open for drainage. You'll need to follow up with wound care specialists, and there's a risk of infection that we'll need to monitor closely." Sarah nodded, absorbing the information as best she could. "When can I go home?" "Not for at least a few days," Dr. Matthews replied firmly. "We need to ensure there's no infection developing, and you'll need to regain some strength before we can discharge you." "Do you live alone, Ms. Johnson?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed, "but I have neighbors who can help if needed." "Good." You'll need assistance when you do go home. You won't have full use of your left arm for some time, and even simple tasks will be challenging. During your recovery, Dr. Matthews made a note in the chart she was holding. Now, there are some people who'd like to speak with you if you're feeling up to it. The sheriff's deputy from earlier, and a conservation officer from the DNR. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but not for too long. I'm pretty tired. I'll let them know they have 15 minutes max. Dr. Matthews agreed. And if you start feeling overwhelmed or in too much pain, just press the call button and the nurse will show them out. She gestured to a button attached to a cord within easy reach of Sarah's right hand. A few minutes later, Deputy Collins entered the room, accompanied by a woman in the uniform of the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources Conservation Officer. The deputy nodded a greeting, while the woman stepped forward and introduced herself. Ms. Johnson, I'm Conservation Officer Lisa Morales with the DNR. I understand you've had a traumatic experience, but we'd appreciate if you could answer a few questions about the bear that attacked you. Sarah nodded, shifting slightly to a more upright position despite the pain it caused. What do you need to know? We're trying to locate the bear, Officer Morales explained. Black bear attacks are extremely rare in Minnesota. Only a handful of documented cases in the past several decades. So when one does occur, we need to identify and remove the animal for public safety. Remove? Sarah asked. You mean kill? That? Officer Morales nodded. I'm afraid so. A bear that has attacked a human unprovoked has demonstrated behavior that makes it a serious threat to public safety. We can't risk it attacking someone else, perhaps with more tragic results next time. Sarah felt a conflicted surge of emotions. Despite her injuries, despite the terror she'd experienced, she wasn't certain she wanted the bear destroyed. As an environmental science teacher, she understood the importance of apex predators in the ecosystem and the rarity of such attacks, but she also recognized the legitimate public safety concerns. I've already provided a statement about the location, she said. It was a black bear, adult male from what I could tell, though I couldn't say for certain. No visible tags or markings that I noticed. It seemed healthy. No obvious injuries or abnormal behavior until it charged me. What about its size? Officer Morales asked, jotting notes on a small pad. Big, Sarah replied. I'd estimate 5 feet tall on all fours, maybe 300 to 350 pounds. It was, she paused, searching for the right word, deliberate. Once it decided to come after me, it was very focused, very determined. Deputy Collins spoke up. We've had reports of a large black bear in that general area over the past few weeks, mostly sightings from hikers and campers. Nothing aggressive reported until now, but it matches your description. We've assembled a team to track the animal, Officer Morales added. They deployed shortly after you were transported here, using dogs trained to track bears. Your kayak was recovered, by the way. It's a bit damaged but salvageable. We've kept it as evidence for now, but it will be returned to you once our investigation is complete. And my dry bag? My phone and keys were in it. Also recovered, Deputy Collins confirmed. Your phone's battery was dead, but we found your neighbor's contact information in your emergency contacts and notified her of the situation. She said she'd be here as soon as possible. Sarah felt a rush of relief at this news. Elaine was a retired nurse who had taken Sarah under her wing when she first moved to Ely, introducing her to other teachers and community members, inviting her to holiday meals, and generally being the friendly neighbor everyone hopes to find in a small town. Thank you, she said sincerely. I appreciate that. Officer Morales put away her notepad. One more question, Ms. Johnson. Was there anything unusual about the area where you encountered the bear? Any evidence of a food cache, a carcass, or anything else that might have made the bear territorial? Sarah thought back to the cove, trying to recall details beyond the bear itself. No, nothing obvious. It was just a small sandy beach in a cove I hadn't explored before. I didn't see any animal remains or evidence that the bear had been feeding there. Officer Morales nodded. Sometimes bears develop unusual behaviors due to previous human interactions. If someone's been feeding it, for instance, or if it's found food in campsites or cabins, it might associate humans with food sources, making it more likely to approach humans rather than avoid them, Sarah concluded, her teacher's instinct for explanation kicking in despite her condition. Exactly, Officer Morales confirmed. Well, we won't take any more of your time, Ms. Johnson. You need to rest and recover. If you remember anything else that might help us locate this bear, please let us know. She placed a business card on the bedside table. And when you're feeling better, we'll need you to come in and make a formal statement for our records. Deputy Collins added his own card next to Officer Morales's. Same goes for the Sheriff's Department. We're documenting this incident for our records as well. And I'm supposed to tell you that those fishermen who found you, Mike and Don Erickson, asked about you. They wanted to know if there was anything they could do to help. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward the brothers who had rescued her. If you speak to them, please tell them I'm going to be okay, and I'll thank them properly when I'm back on my feet. Will do, Deputy Collins promised. Get some rest, Ms. Johnson. After they left, Sarah sank back against her pillows, the brief conversation having drained what little energy she had regained. Her thoughts returned to the bear, now being hunted because of its encounter with her. She understood the necessity. A bear that had attacked a human once could do so again, but she couldn't help feeling a sense of sadness at the thought of the animal being destroyed. Her reflections were interrupted by a light knock at the door. Elaine Winters peeked in, her round face creased with concern. "Sarah, are you awake, dear?" "Elaine," Sarah greeted her neighbor with genuine relief. "Yes, come in." Elaine entered, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of Sarah's bandaged face and arm. "Oh, honey," she said, moving to the bedside and gently taking Sarah's right hand in both of hers. "When the deputy called and said you'd been attacked by a bear, I could hardly believe it." "How are you feeling?" "Like I fought a bear and lost," Sarah replied with a weak attempt at humor. "But I'm alive, which is more than I expected when it first attacked me." Elaine shook her head, her silver-gray bob swinging with the movement. "I've lived up here for 30 years, and I've never heard of anyone being attacked by a black bear. They usually run at the first sign of humans." "That's what I thought too," Sarah agreed. "But this one definitely didn't get the memo." She shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at her stitches. "Did the deputy tell you I might need some help when they discharge me? I won't be able to manage. It's on my own for a while." "Of course you'll need help," Elaine declared firmly. "And you don't even need to ask. I've already set up the guest room at my place. You'll stay with me until you're back on your feet. No arguments." Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes, touched by her neighbor's immediate and practical offer of assistance. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "Nonsense." Elaine dismissed the gratitude with a wave of her hand. "It's what neighbors do. Besides, you've helped me plenty of times, shoveling my walk all winter, bringing me soup when I had that nasty flu last year. It all balances out in the end." Sarah managed a small smile, grateful for Elaine's matter-of-fact approach that helped normalize the situation. "Did they tell you when they might release me?" The nurse I spoke to said at least 3 days, assuming no infection develops. They're very concerned about infection from the bite wounds. Apparently bear mouths are particularly nasty breeding grounds for bacteria. "So I've been told," Sarah confirmed. "They've got me on IV antibiotics already." Elaine nodded approvingly. "Good. Don't mess around with animal bites. I had a patient once, this was when I was still nursing down in Minneapolis, who let a cat bite go untreated. Ended up with sepsis and nearly lost his hand." She patted Sarah's arm gently. "But enough about that. Is there anything you need from your house? Clothes, toiletries, your phone charger?" "All of the above," Sarah admitted. "Everything I had with me is either destroyed or evidence now, apparently." "I'll go after visiting hours and pack you a bag," Elaine promised. "Your spare key still on the hook by the back door?" Sarah nodded, then immediately regretted the movement as pain lanced through her neck and face. "Yes, same place. Thank you, Elaine. You just focus on healing," her neighbor instructed. "I'll take care of everything else." She settled into the chair beside Sarah's bed. "Now, if you're not too tired, why don't you tell me what happened?" The deputy wasn't big on details. Sarah recounted the events of the morning, from her peaceful paddle across Lake Vermilion to the terrifying attack and her rescue by the Erickson brothers. Elaine listened attentively, her expression alternating between horror and relief as the story unfolded. "My God," she said when Sarah had finished. "It's a miracle you survived. So many things could have gone wrong. You could have drowned when it knocked you into the water or bled out before help arrived." "I know," Sarah agreed, the reality of how close she'd come to death hitting her anew. "If Mike and Don hadn't come along when they did," she left the sentence unfinished, unwilling to articulate the likely outcome. "Well, they did come along," Elaine said firmly, squeezing Sarah's hand. "And you're here, and you're going to be fine. Different maybe, those scars will be with you, but alive and whole where it matters most." Sarah nodded, grateful for her neighbor's straightforward acknowledgement of the changes the attack would bring to her life. The physical scars would be the most obvious, but she suspected the emotional impact would run deeper and last longer. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to kayak again," she admitted, voicing one of the fears that had been forming in the back of her mind. Just the thought of being out on the water, alone and vulnerable. "Give it time," Elaine advised. "Right now everything is fresh and raw. Your wounds, your memories, your fear. Decisions about the future can wait until you've had a chance to heal in body and spirit. The wisdom in these words resonated with Sarah. "You're right," she acknowledged. "One day at a time." "Exactly," Elaine agreed. "And for today, your job is simply to rest and let your body begin the healing process. Everything else can wait." As if on cue, a nurse entered the room carrying a syringe. "Time for your next dose of pain medication, Miss Johnson," she announced, checking the ID band on Sarah's wrist against her chart. "This might make you drowsy, so don't fight it if you feel like sleeping." Sarah nodded her understanding as the nurse injected the medication into her IV line. Almost immediately, a warmth began to spread through her veins, and the sharp edges of her pain softened. "I think I will rest for a bit," she murmured, her eyelids growing heavy. "I'll be right here," Elaine promised, settling more comfortably in the chair. "You sleep. I brought my Kindle, so I'm all set." Sarah allowed her eyes to close, grateful for the medication that dulled her pain and for the presence of her friend. That eased her mind. As consciousness began to slip away, her thoughts turned once more to the bear, now being hunted through the forests around Lake Vermilion. She hoped, in a strange way, that it would evade its pursuers, even as she recognized the danger it posed. There was a wildness to the animal, a perfect adaptation to its environment that she couldn't help but respect, despite what it had done to her. With these conflicted thoughts, Sarah drifted into a deep, drug-induced sleep. The next 3 days passed in a blur of medical procedures, pain management, and brief periods of lucidity between medication doses. Dr. Matthews monitored Sarah's wounds closely for signs of infection, changing bandages, and checking drain tubes while explaining each step of the treatment process. Physical therapists visited to demonstrate gentle exercises that would maintain mobility in Sarah's injured arm without disrupting the healing process. A trauma counselor stopped by to discuss the psychological impact of the attack and to provide resources for ongoing support. Through it all, Elaine remained a constant presence, arriving each morning when visiting hours began and staying until they ended in the evening. She brought fresh clothes and toiletries from Sarah's house, helped her wash her hair in the bathroom sink, and provided a much-needed connection to normal life outside the hospital walls. On the 4th day after the INT attack, Dr. Matthews pronounced Sarah stable enough for discharge, provided she had adequate support at home. "The wounds are healing nicely," she informed Sarah during morning rounds. "No signs of infection and your blood work looks good. The pain should be manageable with oral medication now rather than IV. Are you still planning to stay with your neighbor?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "Elaine has everything set up at her house. She's coming to pick me up this afternoon." "Excellent." Dr. Matthews made a note in Sarah's chart. "I'll have the discharge paperwork prepared. You'll need to follow up with your primary care physician in 1 week, and I've scheduled appointments with the wound care clinic and physical therapy. The prescriptions for antibiotics and pain management will be included with your discharge papers." Sarah nodded, relieved to be leaving the hospital, but apprehensive about the next phase of her recovery. The pain had diminished somewhat, but any movement of her left arm still sent spikes of agony through her body, and the facial wounds throbbed persistently beneath their bandages. As Dr. Matthews turned to leave, Sarah called after her. "Doctor, has there been any news about the bear, whether they found it?" The physician paused, turning back with a sympathetic expression. "I haven't heard anything official, but one of the nurses mentioned that her husband works for the DNR, and they're still searching. Apparently they found some tracks and other evidence, but the bear itself has proven elusive." Sarah wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or concerned by this news. "Thanks for letting me know." After Dr. Matthews departed, a nurse arrived to remove Sarah's IV and help her dress in the loose clothing Elaine had brought from her house, a button-up shirt that could accommodate her bandaged arm and elastic-waisted pants that required minimal dexterity to manage. The simple act of dressing exhausted Sarah, highlighting how significantly the attack had weakened her. Elaine arrived shortly after lunch, bringing a lightweight jacket for Sarah despite the warm September weather. "Better to have it and not need it," she declared when Sarah questioned the necessity. "Besides, the hospital can be chilly, and you might feel cold as a side effect of the medication." The discharge process took another hour, with a nurse reviewing care instructions and medication schedules while Sarah tried to absorb the information through the fog of pain and fatigue. Finally, with prescriptions in hand and a folder full of follow-up appointments, Sarah was wheeled to the hospital entrance where Elaine had parked her practical Subaru Outback. The transition from wheelchair to car proved challenging, each movement sending fresh waves of pain through Sarah's injured body despite the medication in her system. By the time she was settled in the passenger seat, a fine sheen of sweat covered her forehead, and she was breathing in short, controlled gasps. "You okay?" Elaine asked, her voice laced with concern as she slid into the driver's seat. "I will." "Be?" Sarah replied through gritted teeth. "Just need a minute." Elaine waited patiently, allowing Sarah time to compose herself before starting the car. "We'll take it nice and slow," she promised. "It's only a 15-minute drive to my place, and I'll avoid the bumpy spots as much as possible." True to her word, Elaine drove with exceptional care, slowing for every curve and pothole to minimize jostling her injured passenger. Sarah leaned her head against the window, watching the familiar landscape of Ely pass by. The small town seemed unchanged, the same storefronts, the same pedestrians going about their business. Yet Sarah felt profoundly different, as if she were observing it all through a new lens. "The school called while you were in the hospital," Elaine mentioned as they drove. "Principal Larson. I told him what happened and he said to take all the time you need to recover. They've arranged for a substitute to cover your classes in the meantime." Sarah nodded, grateful for her employer's understanding, but concerned about her students. "My lesson plans only go through next week," she worried, "and I had field trips planned for the ecology unit." "One thing at a time," Elaine reminded her gently. "You can work with the substitute once you're feeling a bit stronger. Right now your only job is to heal." The logic was sound, but Sarah struggled with the forced inactivity. She'd always been independent and active, filling her days with teaching, outdoor activities, and community involvement. The prospect of weeks or months of limited mobility and dependence on others felt almost as daunting as the physical pain itself. Elaine's house was a neat, one-story craftsman with a deep front porch and well-tended garden. She parked in the Ida driveway and came around to help Sarah from the car, supporting her right side as they made their way slowly up the walkway and steps. Inside, Elaine had transformed her guest room into a recovery space. Extra pillows were arranged on the bed to support Sarah's injured arm. A small table beside it held a pitcher of water and a glass, and a stack of books and magazines occupied the corner of the dresser. "I moved the TV from the den in here," Elaine explained, gesturing to the small flat screen mounted on the wall opposite the bed. "And I put some of your clothes in the dresser. Just comfortable things that should be easy to manage with one arm. The bathroom's stocked with your toiletries, and I've set up a chair in the shower so you can sit while washing." Sarah blinked, back tears at her friend's thoughtfulness. "Elaine, I don't know how to thank you for all this." The older woman waved off her gratitude. "You do the same for me. Now let's get you settled. You look about ready to drop." With Elaine's assistance, Sarah changed into clean pajamas and settled onto the prepared bed, propped against the pillows to keep pressure off her injuries. The brief activity had depleted her limited reserves of energy, and she felt herself drifting towards sleep, even as Elaine arranged her medications on the bedside table and explained the schedule for taking them. "Rest now," Elaine advised, noticing Sarah's drooping eyelids. "I'll wake you when it's time for your next dose of antibiotics." Sarah surrendered to exhaustion, closing her eyes and letting sleep claim her. Her last conscious thought was a wordless gratitude for the safety and comfort of Elaine's home after the clinical sterility of the hospital. She awakened some hours later to the gentle sound of Elaine moving about the room, opening curtains to admit the golden light of late afternoon. For a moment Sarah was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings confusing her sleep-muddled mind. Then the pain in her arm and chest brought reality crashing back. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. "Just after 5, Elaine replied, turning at the sound of Sarah's voice. "You've been out for about 4 hours. How are you feeling?" Sarah took mental inventory of her body. The pain was there, a constant presence, but not as sharp as it had been earlier. "Better, I think. Less foggy, at least." "Good. It's time for your antibiotics, and you should take them with food. Do you feel up to coming to the kitchen, or would you prefer a tray in here?" Sarah considered the question. The idea of getting up was daunting, but so was spending all her time confined to the guest room. "Kitchen," she decided. "I could use a change of scenery." With Elaine's assistance, Sarah made her way slowly to the kitchen, where a simple meal of soup and bread awaited. The homemade chicken soup, one of Elaine's specialties, smelled wonderful, but Sarah found her appetite diminished. Whether from pain, medication, or the lingering effects of trauma, she couldn't tell. "Try to eat what you can," Elaine encouraged, setting a small bowl in front of Sarah. "You need nutrients to heal properly." Sarah managed about half the soup and a few bites of bread before setting down her spoon. "It's delicious," she assured her hostess. "I just don't seem to have much appetite right now." "Perfectly normal," Elaine assured her, clearing the dishes. Trauma and medication can both affect appetite. It'll come back as you heal. After taking her medications, Sarah settled in Elaine's comfortable living room, where large windows offered a view of the garden and the woods beyond. A cardinal flitted between branches of a birch tree, its bright red plumage standing out against the green foliage and white bark. "You have a visitor, by the way," Elaine mentioned, as she joined Sarah with a cup of tea. "Officer Morales from the DNR stopped by while you were asleep. She wanted to update you on the search for the bear." Sarah's attention sharpened. "Did they find it?" "Not yet," Elaine replied. She said, "They tracked it for several miles from where you were attacked, but then lost the trail when it crossed a stream. They're still searching, setting up trail cameras and baited traps in the area." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and unease at this news. "Did she say anything else?" "She left her card again and asked if you could call her when you're feeling up to it. Said there've been more bear sightings reported in the area since your attack, and they're trying to determine if it's the same animal." Sarah nodded, her thoughts turning to the other people who might encounter the bear: hikers, campers, kayakers like herself who sought solitude in the wilderness around Ely. If it was targeting humans rather than avoiding them, as most black bears did, it represented a genuine threat. "I should call her," Sarah decided. "My phone's in my bag, I think." Elaine retrieved Sarah's phone, now charged and functioning again after its dunking in Lake Vermilion. Sarah dialed the number on Officer Morales' card. Unsurprised when it went to voicemail, conservation officers spent most of their time in the field rather than at a desk. "Officer Morales, this is Sarah Johnson, the woman who was attacked by the black bear on Lake Vermilion. I understand you're looking for additional information. I'm staying with Elaine Winters while I recover. Please call me back at this number when you have a chance." She left Elaine's address as well before ending the call. "She'll probably stop by tomorrow," Elaine predicted. "They're taking this very seriously. Bear attacks are rare enough to make the news, and they want to resolve the situation before anyone else gets hurt." Sarah nodded, feeling a weight of responsibility. If someone else was injured or killed by the same bear that had attacked her, would she bear some of the blame for failing to provide information that might have helped locate it? Yet what more could she tell them? Her memories of the attack were vivid, but focused on her own fear and pain rather than details that might help identify one specific bear from others in the area. She was still pondering these questions when her phone rang. Not Officer Morales returning her call, but a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Ms. Johnson, this is Mike Erickson." The voice was vaguely familiar, though Sarah had only brief, pain-hazed memories of her rescuer. "The fisherman who found you after the bear attack? I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, not at all," Sarah assured him, genuinely pleased to hear from one of the men who had saved her life. "I was hoping to thank you properly, you and your brother." "No thanks necessary." Mike dismissed her gratitude with the ease of someone uncomfortable with praise. "We just happened to be in the right place at the right time. I'm calling to let you know we found your kayak paddle." "My paddle?" Sarah hadn't even realized it was missing, so focused had she been on her injuries and recovery. "Yeah, it washed up on the shore about a quarter mile from where we found you. DNR has your kayak, I think, but nobody mentioned the paddle. So when Don and I spotted it this morning, we figured it was probably yours. It's a bit scratched up, but otherwise intact." Thank you," Sarah managed, touched by the brothers' consideration. "You didn't have to go looking for it." "We were fishing that same area again," Mike explained. "Figured lightning doesn't strike twice, bear-wise. Anyway, we'd be happy to drop the paddle off wherever you're staying, save you the trouble of replacing it." Sarah hesitated, then provided Elaine's address. "I'm staying with a friend while I recover, but please don't go out of your way." "It's no trouble," Mike assured her. "We're heading into town tomorrow anyway for supplies. We could stop by around noon if that works." "That would be fine," Sarah agreed. "And Mike, thank you again for everything. I wouldn't be here if you and Don hadn't come along when you did. Like I said, right place, right time. We'll see you tomorrow, Ms. Johnson." After ending the call, Sarah explained the conversation to Elaine, who seemed pleased by the prospect of visitors. "It'll do you good to properly meet the men who saved you," she declared, "and I'll make my famous blueberry muffins to thank them." Despite her exhaustion, Sarah found herself looking forward to the meeting. Her memories of Mike and Don Erickson were fragments at best, impressions of strong hands helping her into their boat, concerned voices discussing her injuries, the reassuring sound of the motor carrying her toward help. She wanted to see them clearly, to thank them properly, now that she was more coherent. The remainder of the evening passed quietly. Sarah took her pain medication and antibiotics on schedule, managed a light dinner, and submitted to Elaine's careful cleaning and rebandaging of her facial wounds. By 9 o'clock, she was back in bed, utterly drained by what would have seemed a minimally active day before the attack. Sleep came in fits and starts, disrupted by pain when she shifted position and by dreams that replayed the attack in vivid detail. In her dreams, the bear's eyes held a malevolent intelligence, and no fisherman arrived to rescue her. She awakened several times, heart racing and body damp with sweat, the memory of the bear's hot breath on her face so real she could almost feel it. Morning brought a measure of relief, the sunlight through the guest room window dispelling the shadows of her nightmares. Elaine helped her shower, a complicated process involving plastic bags taped over her bandages and the promised chair in the tub, and change into fresh clothes. The simple activities left Sarah trembling with exhaustion, but she insisted on coming to the kitchen for breakfast rather than returning to bed. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Elaine observed as she set a plate of scrambled eggs in front of Sarah. "Recovery isn't a race." "I know," Sarah acknowledged, "but I need to feel like I'm making progress, however small. Spending all day in bed makes me feel like an invalid." Elaine's expression softened with understanding. "Just don't overdo it. 2 steps forward and 1 step back is still moving in the right direction." Sarah managed more breakfast than she had expected, perhaps because the scrambled eggs were easier to eat one-handed than the soup had been. Afterward, she settled in the living room with a book, while Elaine bustled about the kitchen, preparing the promised muffins for their visitors. The morning passed quietly, interrupted only by a call from Officer Morales, who arranged to stop by that afternoon to follow up on Sarah's message. "We've had another confirmed sighting," the conservation officer explained. "A hiker on the Misabi Trail spotted a large black bear that matches your description. It showed unusual interest in the hiker rather than retreating, which reinforces our concern that this may be the same animal that attacked you." Sarah felt her chest tighten at this news. Was anyone hurt? No, thankfully. The hiker was with a group and they made enough noise to deter the bear eventually. But it's concerning behavior. Most black bears would avoid a large group of humans, not approach them. "I'll tell you everything I can remember," Sarah promised, "though I'm not sure how much help it will be. Any detail could be useful," Officer Morales assured her. "I'll see you around 3 if that works with your schedule." Sarah confirmed the time and ended the call, her mood sobered by the conversation. The bear was still out there, still showing unusual interest in humans, still posing a threat to anyone who encountered it. At precisely noon, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Mike and Don Erickson. Elaine welcomed them warmly, while Sarah remained seated, still too weak to rise easily. The brothers entered the living room, both removing their caps in a gesture of old-fashioned politeness that made Sarah smile despite her somber thoughts. In the clarity of full consciousness, Sarah saw her rescuers properly for the first time. Mike, the older of the two, was tall and lean, with weather-beaten features and salt and pepper hair cropped short at the sides. Don was shorter and stockier, with a full beard streaked with grey and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. Both men wore flannel shirts despite the warm September weather, jeans worn soft with age and practical work boots. "Ms. Johnson," Mike greeted her, his voice confirming he was the one who had called. "Good to see you looking more yourself." "Sarah, please," she insisted, extending her right hand. "And it's good to properly meet you both. I wasn't exactly at my best the last time." Mike shook her hand carefully as if afraid she might break. "You were tough as nails considering the circumstances. Not everyone would have survived what you went through." Don nodded agreement as he took his turn, shaking her hand. "Most folks would have given up, but you kept fighting. That bear got more than it bargained for with you." Sarah felt her cheeks warm at their praise. "I was terrified," she admitted. "If you hadn't come along when you did." "But we did," Mike interrupted, firmly. "No point dwelling on what-ifs. You're here, you're healing, and that's what matters," he held up the kayak paddle he'd been carrying, scratched and scraped in places but still functional. "Where would you like this?" "Just leave it by the door for now," Sarah directed. "I won't be using it anytime soon, but I appreciate you bringing it back." Elaine emerged from the kitchen with a tray of muffins and coffee, insisting that the brothers stay and eat, while they told Sarah about their rescue efforts. Slightly uncomfortable with the attention but genuinely grateful, Mike and Don settled into chairs and accepted the offered refreshments. "We don't usually fish that cove," Don explained between bites of muffin, but Mike had a feeling about it that morning. "Call it fisherman's intuition," Mike said with a shrug. "Just had a hunch we might find some walleye in that area." "Instead you found me," Sarah observed. "Lucky coincidence." "Providence, my mother would have called it," Don commented. "Right place, right time for a reason." Sarah couldn't argue with that assessment, whatever one chose to call it. Have you lived in the area long? She asked, genuinely curious about the men who had saved her life. All our lives, Mike confirmed. Born and raised about 20 miles from here. Our father was a lumberjack, his father before him. We tried a few other things. Don was in the army for a while. I worked construction down in the cities, but we always came back. Something about these woods and lakes gets in your blood. Sarah nodded her understanding. Though not a native of the area, she'd felt the same pull toward the wilderness of northern Minnesota. Do you encounter bears often when you're fishing or hunting? See them from a distance now and then, Don replied. More often in spring when they're coming out of hibernation, hungry and looking for easy meals. But they usually keep their distance. That's why what happened to you is so unusual. The DNR is still searching for it, Sarah told them. Apparently, there have been more sightings since my attack. A conservation officer is coming by later today to ask more questions. Mike's expression grew serious. They need to find it before someone else gets hurt. A bear that goes after humans isn't right in the head. Disease, injury, or just bad temperament, something's off. That's what Officer Morales said, Sarah agreed. I'm trying to remember any details that might help them identify it specifically, but everything happened so fast, and I was focused more on getting away than on observing it. Understandable, Don said sympathetically. Not like you were out. They're doing a nature documentary. You were fighting for your life. The conversation continued for another half hour, turning to more general topics. The brothers' favorite fishing spots, information they shared reluctantly, as all fishermen, to assume the unusually warm September weather, and the tourism season winding down as fall approached. Throughout, Sarah found herself warming to these straightforward, unassuming men who had saved her without hesitation and now seemed embarrassed by her gratitude. When they finally rose to leave, Sarah once again extended her thanks. I know you don't want to hear it, but I am grateful. If there's ever anything I can do for you, please don't hesitate to ask. Mike shifted uncomfortably at her words, but Don smiled. Maybe when you're back on your feet, you could show us some of those science things you teach. Mike's grandson is crazy about animals and nature, wants to be a biologist someday. It'd be neat to have a real expert show him around. I'd be happy to, Sarah agreed immediately, pleased at the prospect of repaying even a small portion of her debt to these men. Once I'm mobile again, let's arrange something. After the Erickson brothers departed, Sarah rested, the morning's activities having depleted her limited reserves of energy. She dozed in the comfortable armchair, awakening only when Elaine gently shook her shoulder. Officer Morales is here, her friend informed her. Are you up to talking with her, or should I ask her to come back another time? Sarah blinked away, the cobwebs of sleep. No, it's fine, I can talk to her now. Officer Morales appeared more casual in regular clothes rather than her uniform, though she still carried herself with the alertness of someone accustomed to reading her surroundings for signs of danger. She settled into the chair Mike had occupied, earlier notepad ready. Thank you for agreeing to see me, Ms. Johnson, she began. How are you feeling? Better than I was, Sarah replied honestly. Still weak, still in pain, but improving day by day. That's good to hear. I won't take too much of your time, but as I mentioned on the phone, we've had additional bear sightings that may be connected to your attack. Anything you can tell me about the bear, specific markings, behavior patterns, distinguishing features, could help us identify whether we're dealing with one problem animal or general increased bear activity in the area. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, trying to recall details of the bear that had attacked her. It was large for a black bear. I'd estimate at least 300 pounds, maybe more. Male from what I could tell, though I'm not an expert in bear sex identification, no visible ear tags or tracking collar which I would have noticed. The fur was solid black, no brown patches or white markings that I could see. Any scars or unusual features? A limp or favoring one side? Sarah shook her head slowly. Nothing obvious. It moved well, both on land and in the water. It seemed healthy and strong. She paused, considering. The only distinctive thing I recall was its behavior, the deliberate way it came after me. Most black bears I've encountered previously, from a distance, seemed skittish, ready to retreat if they noticed human presence. This one was different. Once it spotted me, it focused on me completely, almost purposefully. Officer Morales made notes as Sarah spoke. That matches reports from other sightings, a purposeful approach rather than the typical caution black bears usually display around humans. Did you notice anything about its eyes? Any discharge or cloudiness that might indicate disease? Sarah tried to recall the bear's eyes, small and dark, she remembered, but nothing unusual about them that she had noticed. No, they seemed normal, though I was more focused on its teeth and claws at that point, she added with a grimace. Understandable, Officer Morales acknowledged. What about its vocalizations? Black bears have distinct sounds they make when threatened or aggressive: huffing, jaw popping, or blowing. Did you hear anything like that? It huffed several times, Sarah recalled, and there was a sort of grunting sound when it was in the water swimming toward me, but no jaw popping or blowing that I remember. The conservation officer continued to ask detailed questions about the bear's appearance and behavior, jotting notes throughout their conversation. Sarah answered as best she could, though many details had blurred in the haze of terror and pain surrounding the attack. "One last thing," Officer Morales said after about 20 minutes. "We recovered your kayak, as you know, but also your dry bag, which contained some food, a granola bar, if I recall correctly. Would you be willing to let our laboratory analyze it? We're trying to determine if there might have been something about the food scent that attracted the bear specifically." "Of course," Sarah agreed immediately. Though it was just a standard granola bar still in its wrapper, bears have an incredible sense of smell, about 7 times more powerful than a bloodhound's. They can detect food odors from over a mile away under the right conditions. Even a sealed wrapper might leak enough scent to attract a hungry bear, especially this time of year when they're actively fattening for winter. Sarah hadn't considered this possibility. Could something as simple as a granola bar in her dry bag have triggered the attack? It seemed simultaneously too mundane and entirely plausible. "Thank you for your time, Ms. Johnson," Officer Morales said as she prepared to leave. "This information will help us in our search efforts. And please, if you remember anything else, no matter how insignificant it might seem, call me immediately." "I will," Sarah promised. "And when you find the bear, I understand why it needs to be removed," but she trailed off, unsure how to express her conflicted feelings about the animal that had nearly killed her. Officer Morales seemed to understand. "It's natural to feel ambivalent," she assured Sarah. "Bears are magnificent animals, perfectly adapted to their environment. What happened to you was traumatic, but from the bear's perspective, it was acting on instinct, not malice. Our job is to protect both the public and the wildlife when possible. In this case, public safety has to take precedence." Sarah nodded, grateful for the officer's understanding. After Morales departed, Sarah found herself physically and emotionally drained by the day's visitors and conversations. She retreated to the guest room, took her medications and lay down, intending just to rest briefly before dinner. Instead, she fell into a deep sleep, awakening only when Elaine gently roused her to take her evening antibiotics. The older woman helped her to the bathroom and back, then brought a tray with a light supper that Sarah managed to eat despite her lingering fatigue. "You've had too much excitement for one day," Elaine observed as she collected the empty dishes. "Tomorrow we're keeping things quiet. Doctor's orders, well, my orders, and I was a nurse for 30 years, so close enough." Sarah smiled weakly, too tired to argue. "Agreed. No more visitors for a while." The next few days passed in a quieter rhythm as Sarah's body continued its slow healing process. She slept much of the time, her body demanding rest to repair the damage from the bear's teeth and claws. When awake, she read or watched television, allowing Elaine to manage the details of daily life: meals, medications, bandage changes, and the steady stream of phone calls from concerned colleagues and friends who had heard about the attack. By the end of the week, Sarah felt strong enough to move about Elaine's house with minimal assistance, though her left arm remained largely immobile in its sling. The wounds on her chest and shoulder itched beneath their bandages, a sign of healing that was both encouraging and maddening. The facial lacerations remained covered, Dr. Matthews having advised keeping them protected from sunlight and potential irritation during the initial healing phase. On Monday, 10 days after the attack, Sarah had her first follow-up appointment with her primary care physician, Dr. Novak. Elaine drove her to the clinic, where the doctor examined her wounds, expressed satisfaction with the healing progress, and adjusted her medication regimen. "The antibiotics are doing their job," he informed Sarah as he checked the bite wounds on her arm. "No signs of infection, and the tissues are granulating nicely. You'll need to continue the full course. Infection can develop even after initial healing appears to be progressing, but we can reduce the pain medication if you're experiencing fewer symptoms." Sarah confirmed that the pain had diminished to a manageable ache most of the time, with sharper twinges only when she moved incautiously or attempted to use her left arm. Dr. Novak prescribed a less potent pain reliever and scheduled a follow-up appointment for the following week. "And the scars?" Sarah asked, voicing the question that had been forming in her mind as the immediate crisis of survival receded. "How visible will they be?" Dr. Novak's expression was compassionate but honest. The facial lacerations will leave visible scars, he confirmed. Dr. Matthews did an excellent job with the suturing, which will minimize their appearance, but they were deep wounds. Once they're fully healed, in about 6 months, you could consult with a plastic surgeon about scar revision if you wish. The scars on your arm and chest will be less noticeable to others, of course, but more extensive. Sarah nodded, having expected this answer, but still finding it difficult to accept. She'd never been vain about her appearance, but the prospect of carrying visible reminders of the attack on her face for the rest of her life was sobering. Many people find that scars become less noticeable over time, both to themselves and to others, Dr. Novak added gently. They fade physically, and they also fade in our awareness. They become part of our story rather than defining features. I hope so, Sarah replied, trying to imagine a future where she didn't flinch at her own reflection. It's just hard to picture right now. Give it time, the doctor advised. Focus on your physical recovery first. The emotional aspects will come along in their own time, and there are resources available to help with that process when you're ready. After the appointment, Elaine suggested a brief stop at Sarah's house to check on things and pick up additional clothing and personal items. If you're feeling up to it, she qualified. We don't have to push things. I'd like to, Sarah decided. It's been almost 2 weeks. I should at least make sure everything's okay. The small bungalow Sarah called home stood quiet and unoccupied in the September sunshine, its garden beginning to show signs of neglect in her absence. Elaine used Sarah's keys to open the door, then helped her navigate the familiar rooms that now seemed subtly changed, as if her absence had allowed them to develop their own identity apart from her. Mail had accumulated on the floor beneath the mail slot, mostly catalogs and bills that Elaine gathered and sorted efficiently. The refrigerator contained a few items that needed to be discarded, but otherwise the house had weathered Sarah's absence well. In her bedroom, Sarah packed additional clothing with Elaine's help, selecting items that would accommodate her bandages and limited mobility. As she moved about the familiar space, she found herself glancing repeatedly at the window that overlooked her backyard and the woods beyond. The bear was still out there, somewhere in those woods, perhaps even passing through her own property when she wasn't home. Sarah, Elaine's voice broke through her thoughts. Are you all right? You've gone quite pale. Just tired, Sarah claimed, though they both knew it wasn't the whole truth, and thinking about the bear, they still haven't found it. Elaine nodded her understanding. It's natural to be anxious after what happened, but you're safe here with me, and when you do come home, we'll make sure you have bear spray and an air horn by every door. The chances of another encounter are incredibly small. I know, Sarah acknowledged. Statistically, I've already used up my lifetime risk of bear attack, but statistics don't seem very comforting right now. One day at a time, Elaine reminded her, gently steering the conversation back to practical matters. Let's finish packing and head back. You look like you could use a rest. Back at Elaine's house, Sarah did indeed rest, the brief excursion having taxed her still limited stamina. She dozed on and off throughout the afternoon, awakening fully only when Elaine called her for dinner. They ate in comfortable silence, Elaine seeming to sense Sarah's need for quiet reflection after the emotional day. After dinner, as they sat in the living room with cups of tea, Sarah's phone rang, Officer Morales' number appearing on the screen. "Hello?" she answered, a flutter of anticipation in her stomach. "Ms. Johnson, it's Officer Morales. I wanted to update you on our search for the bear." The conservation officer's tone was professional, but tinged with what sounded like disappointment. "We've had to suspend active tracking operations. Despite our best efforts, we haven't been able to locate the specific animal that attacked you." Sarah absorbed this news, uncertain how to feel about it. "So it's still out there?" "Potentially, yes. We've documented at least 3 different adult male black bears in the general area through trail cameras and tracks. Without distinctive markings or a way to conclusively identify which one was involved in your attack, we can't justify removing all of them." "I understand," Sarah said, and she did. Conservation ethics wouldn't permit the destruction of multiple bears when only one had demonstrated problematic behavior. "We're maintaining the trail cameras and warning signs in the area," Officer Morales continued, "and we've increased patrols around popular recreation spots. If there are additional incidents or sightings of unusually bold behavior, we'll resume the search with more specific parameters." "Thank you for letting me know," Sarah said, "and for all your efforts. Of course, I also wanted to inform you that your case has been officially documented in our wildlife incident database. It's an important record, both for public safety monitoring and for scientific research on bear behavior. Your cooperation has been very helpful." After ending the call, Sarah relayed the information to Elaine, who seemed concerned by the news that the bear remained at large. "Should we be worried?" she asked. "I mean for other people who might encounter it." "The DNR seems to be taking reasonable precautions," Sarah replied. "And black bear attacks are incredibly rare, even after accounting for what happened to me. I don't think there's cause for general panic." She paused, considering. "Though I might suggest to Principal Larson that the school postpone any hiking field trips for a while, just to be safe." The conversation drifted to other topics, but Sarah's mind kept returning to the bear, now something of a phantom in her life, present in her nightmares and her healing wounds, but ethereal in reality, moving unseen through the forests around Ely while humans maintained their uneasy coexistence with the wilderness. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah's recovery continued steadily. Physical therapy sessions helped her regain limited mobility in her left arm, though the damaged muscles and tendons would require months of work to approach their previous function. The wounds on her chest and shoulder healed enough for the bandages to be reduced, and eventually Dr. Matthews removed the stitches from her face, replacing them with steri strips to continue supporting the healing tissue. During her first glance, in the mirror without bandages covering her face, Sarah had stared at her reflection in shock, hardly recognizing the person who looked back at her. 3 parallel gashes ran from her left temple, down across her cheekbone to the corner of her mouth, livid red against her pale skin, their edges puckered where the stitches had held them together. They would fade with time, Dr. Matthews assured her, but they would always be visible, a permanent reminder of her encounter with the bear. Sarah had nodded mutely, accepting this new reality, even as she struggled to reconcile it with her self-image. She had never defined herself by her appearance, but now she would be defined by these scars in the eyes of others. The woman who survived a bear attack, marked forever by the experience. By early October, Sarah felt strong enough to return to her own home, though Elaine insisted on checking in daily and helping with tasks that remained challenging. Sarah's colleagues from the high school organized a meal train, delivering casseroles and soups that required minimal preparation, their visits providing welcome social interaction after weeks of relative isolation. Principal Larson stopped by with flowers and an offer to ease Sarah back into teaching with half days once her doctor cleared her to return to work. "The students miss you," he informed her. "They've been making cards and asking when you'll be back." The thought of facing her students with her new scars provoked anxiety, but Sarah reminded herself that teenagers, for all their social awkwardness, could also be surprisingly resilient and accepting. "I'll talk to Dr. Novak at my next appointment," she promised. "I'd like to get back to some version of normal life." Normal, however, had been redefined by the attack. Sarah found herself jumping at unexpected noises, checking and rechecking that her doors and windows were secured at night, and avoiding looking directly at her reflection in mirrors. She declined invitations from friends to join hiking excursions, the thought of entering the woods filling her with a dread she couldn't articulate even to herself. Sleep remained problematic, interrupted by nightmares in which the bear found her again, this time in her own home, its massive form somehow squeezing through doors built for humans, its breath hot against her face as she tried to scream but produced no sound. She would awaken gasping, heart racing, the phantom smell of the bear's fishy breath lingering in her nostrils. 3 weeks after returning to her own home, Sarah received an unexpected visit from Mike Erickson. He arrived late on a Sunday afternoon, cap in hand, looking uncomfortable on her front porch. "Mike," she greeted him, genuinely pleased to see a familiar face despite the surprise. "Come in." He entered hesitantly, his tall frame seeming too large for her small living room. "I won't stay long," he assured her. "Just wanted to check how you're doing. Don and I have been wondering." "I'm getting better," Sarah told him, gesturing toward a chair. "Please sit. Can I offer you coffee or tea?" Mike settled into the offered chair, still holding his cap. "No, thank you, I'm fine." His eyes flickered briefly to the scars on Sarah's face, then away, his expression carefully neutral. "It's okay," she said gently. "Everyone looks. I'm getting used to it." Mike's weather-beaten face flushed slightly. "Sorry, didn't mean to." Stare. "They're not as bad as you might think, just shows you're a survivor." The simple statement, delivered without artifice, eased something tight in Sarah's chest. "Thank you for that," she said sincerely. "Some days it's hard to see it that way." "Understandable," Mike acknowledged. "Takes time to adjust to changes, especially ones you didn't choose." They talked for a while about her recovery, about the continued absence of news regarding the bear, about the town's preparation for the upcoming winter. Mike mentioned that his grandson would be visiting for Thanksgiving, and Sarah renewed her offer to provide a nature lesson once she was back to teaching. He'd like that, Mike said, a rare smile softening his features. Kids obsessed with wildlife. Wants to know everything about every animal in the woods. Including bears? Sarah asked, testing her own reaction to the topic. Especially bears, Mike confirmed, though he knows they're not to be trifled with. What happened to you has been a powerful lesson for him. His grandfather's been hammering home the safety rules ever since. When Mike rose to leave, Sarah found herself reluctant to see him go. There was something comforting about his presence, perhaps because he had seen her at her most vulnerable and treated her with dignity nonetheless, or perhaps simply because he represented a connection to a life-changing event that most people could only imagine. Would you and Don like to come for dinner sometime? She offered impulsively. I'm not much of a cook at the best of times, and with one arm still limited, it would be very simple, but I'd like to do something to thank you properly. Mike looked surprised but pleased by the invitation. That's kind of you, but not necessary. We didn't do anything special, just what anyone would do. Not everyone would have handled it as well as you did, Sarah insisted, and I'd enjoy the company. Unless you'd rather not, she added, suddenly uncertain. No, we'd be honored, Mike assured her quickly. Don makes a mean apple pie, family recipe. He could bring dessert. They settled on the following Saturday, and Sarah found herself looking forward to the dinner with unexpected enthusiasm. It represented a step toward reclaiming her social life, toward the normalcy she craved, despite knowing she would never fully return to the person she had been before the attack. Throughout the week, Sarah continued her physical therapy and began preparations for returning to work. Dr. Novak cleared her for half days beginning the following Monday, with restrictions on lifting and extended standing. Principal Larson arranged for a classroom aide to assist with lab setups and other physically demanding tasks, ensuring Sarah could focus on teaching without overtaxing her still healing body. Saturday arrived clear and crisp, the northern Minnesota air carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter. Sarah spent the morning tidying her small house, feeling stronger than she had in weeks, despite the persistent limitations of her injured arm. Elaine arrived in the afternoon to help with dinner preparations, bringing a casserole she insisted would be far better than anything Sarah could manage with her restricted mobility. You're looking more like yourself, Elaine observed as they worked together in the kitchen. There's color in your cheeks again. I feel more like myself, Sarah agreed, still not completely there, but closer. The Erickson brothers arrived promptly at 6, Dawn indeed bearing a homemade apple pie that filled the house with the aroma of cinnamon and nutmeg. Both men had made concessions to the social occasion. Their flannel shirts were newer and clearly freshly pressed, their jeans replaced by khakis. Don had trimmed his beard, and Mike's hair showed evidence of a recent cut. Dinner passed pleasantly, the conversation flowing more easily than Sarah had anticipated. The brothers shared stories of their decades fishing the lakes around Ely, including several close calls with storms and one memorable encounter with a moose that had decided their campsite belonged to him. Sarah found herself laughing genuinely for the first time since the attack, the tension that had become her constant companion temporarily easing in the warmth of shared meal and conversation. After dinner, as they enjoyed Don's excellent pie, Mike broached a subject Sarah hadn't expected. Some folks in town are talking about your experience, he said carefully. There's been interest in having you speak about it, at the school maybe, or at the community center. Educational-like, about bear safety and what to do if you encounter one. Sarah set down her fork, caught off guard by the suggestion. I'm not sure I'm the best person for that, she demurred. Considering I did everything wrong and still got attacked, that's exactly why you'd be effective, Don countered. You can speak from experience about how unpredictable wildlife can be, even when you think you know the rules. And about survival, Mike added quietly. About fighting when everything seems hopeless. That's a powerful message, especially for young folks. Sarah considered their words, turning the idea over in her mind. Could she transform her traumatic experience into something educational, something that might prevent others from facing similar danger? The thought was simultaneously appealing and terrifying. Speaking publicly about the attack would mean reliving it, exposing her vulnerability to an audience, allowing her scars to become a visual aid in her cautionary tale. I'll think about it, she promised, neither committing nor refusing outright. Once I'm back teaching and have a better sense of my energy levels. The brothers accepted this response without pressing further, and the conversation moved to less charged topics for the remainder of the evening. When they departed a few hours later, Sarah found herself genuinely sorry to see them go, their straightforward kindness having provided a respite from the isolation she had increasingly imposed on herself since the attack. "You should consider their suggestion," Elaine commented as she helped clean up after the guests had left. "It might be healing for you to reclaim the narrative of what happened, to transform it from something that happened to you into something you can use to help others." "Maybe," Sarah acknowledged, "but not yet. I'm still trying to make peace with it myself." Monday brought Sarah back to Ely High School, her return to teaching both welcome and challenging. The staff had been briefed in advance about her injuries and limitations, but the students, despite having been told she would look different, couldn't hide their initial shock at the visible evidence of her encounter with the bear. Sarah addressed it directly in her first class. "Yes, I was attacked by a bear," she confirmed, standing before her environmental science students with a composure she didn't entirely feel. "Yes, these scars are from that attack. Yes, you can ask questions, scientific ones about bear behavior or factual ones about what happened. No, I don't need pity. And yes, I'm still the same Ms. Johnson who expects your lab reports on time and doesn't accept excuses about homework being eaten by anything, including bears." The approach worked better than she had dared hope. The initial awkwardness dissolved into curiosity, the questions ranging from thoughtful inquiries about black bear biology to more personal but still respectful questions about her experience. By the end of the day, Sarah felt she had reclaimed her role as a teacher, the scars becoming, if not invisible, then at least secondary to her identity in the classroom. The half-day schedule proved wise, however. By noon, Sarah was exhausted, her arm aching from the limited use required for writing on the whiteboard and distributing materials. Principal Larson insisted she use his office to rest before driving home, his concern genuine beneath his professional demeanor. "The students are glad to have you back," he told her as she gathered her things to leave. "Your substitute did her best, but there's no replacing Ms. Johnson when it comes to making environmental science interesting." "Thank you," Sarah replied, touched by the compliment. "It's good to be back. Tiring, but good." Over the following weeks, Sarah gradually increased her teaching hours as her strength returned, eventually resuming a full schedule by mid-November. The physical therapy continued, her left arm regaining more function, though still limited in strength and range of motion. The facial scars began to fade from angry red to a more subdued pink, still prominently visible, but no longer drawing immediate attention in every social interaction. Throughout this period of readjustment and healing, Sarah found herself contemplating the suggestion Mike and Don had made about sharing her experience more broadly. The idea had taken root in her mind, growing alongside her recovery until she could no longer dismiss it easily. On a snowy evening in early December, Sarah finally made her decision. She contacted Principal Larson to propose a presentation for the high school's outdoor education program, a session on wilderness safety with a focus on coexisting with wildlife, including bears. Larson embraced the idea enthusiastically, suggesting they expand it to include parents and community members if Sarah felt comfortable with a larger audience. "I think I do," she told him, surprising herself with the realization that she genuinely wanted to share her story beyond the limited circle who already knew the details. "It feels like the right thing to do, to make something constructive come from what happened." The presentation was scheduled for late January, giving Sarah time to prepare both her material and herself for the emotional challenge of recounting her experience publicly. She researched bear behavior more extensively than she had even for her teaching, consulting with DNR wildlife biologists and reading academic studies on black bear encounters with humans. Officer Morales, whom Sarah had kept in occasional contact with, offered to participate, providing the official perspective on how agencies respond to wildlife conflicts. The conservation officer also confirmed that despite continued monitoring, the bear that had attacked Sarah had never been conclusively identified or captured. The search had been officially closed for the season once the bears entered hibernation, though trail cameras remained in place to monitor spring activity when the animals emerged. As the presentation date approached, Sarah found herself oddly calm. The very act of preparing, of transforming her terrifying experience into an educational narrative, had helped her process what had happened in ways that simple recovery had not. She was no longer simply a victim of a bear attack. She was becoming an advocate for wilderness safety, a voice for responsible coexistence with the wildlife that made northern Minnesota special. The evening of the presentation arrived with a fresh snowfall that turned Ely into a winter postcard, the streets and buildings blanketed in white. The high school auditorium filled with students, parents, and community members, including Mike and Don Erickson, who had requested personal invitations, and Elaine, who had insisted on driving Sarah despite her protests that she was fully capable of managing on her own. Principal Larson introduced her with a brief summary of her credentials as an environmental science teacher and a simple acknowledgement of the event that had led to the evening's presentation. Then Sarah stood alone at the podium, facing an audience of familiar and unfamiliar faces, all waiting to hear about her encounter with one of Minnesota's most powerful predators. On a September morning last year, she began, her voice steady. Despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach, I went kayaking on Lake Vermilion, something I'd done countless times before. I was an experienced outdoorswoman who thought I understood the risks and knew how to mitigate them. I was wrong, not because I lacked knowledge, but because nature remains fundamentally unpredictable, no matter how much we study it. She proceeded to recount the events of that morning, neither dramatizing nor minimizing what had happened, sharing both the factual details of the attack and her emotional experience of it. She described the bear's behavior from a scientific perspective, unusual but not inexplicable, and her own responses, both the instinctive reactions that may have saved her life and the mistakes that, in hindsight, she might have avoided. Officer Morales joined her for the second portion of the presentation, discussing the DNR's response to the attack and the broader context of human-wildlife conflicts in Minnesota. Together, they outlined practical safety measures for outdoor recreation in bear country, emphasizing respect for wildlife and preparation for unexpected encounters. During the question and answer session that followed, a young girl near the back raised her hand. "Aren't you scared to go back in the woods now?" she asked, her expression earnest beneath a knitted cap. "I would be terrified." Sarah considered the question carefully, aware of the many parents in the audience who might be wondering the same thing, whether her experience would be used to justify fear of the wilderness rather than respect for it. "Yes," she admitted honestly, "I am still scared sometimes. The nightmares have mostly faded, but the fear remains." However, she paused, gathering her thoughts. Being afraid and letting that fear control your actions are two different things. The wilderness deserves our respect, not our fear. Bears and other wildlife aren't monsters. They're animals acting according to their nature in their own habitat. We're the visitors in their home. She touched her scars lightly, a gesture that had become unconscious in recent months. "These remind me not that nature is dangerous, but that it's unpredictable, and that's a distinction worth making. I still go outdoors. I still hike the trails around Ely, though not alone anymore. I haven't returned to kayaking yet, but I hope to someday." The presentation concluded shortly after, with Principal Larson thanking Sarah and Officer Morales for their time and insights. As the audience dispersed, many people approached Sarah personally, some to express admiration for her courage, others to share their own less dramatic wildlife encounters, a few to simply thank her for the practical safety information she had provided. Mike and Don waited until the crowd had thinned before approaching. "You did good," Mike said simply, the highest praise he was likely to offer. "Folks around here needed to hear that, especially the part about respect instead of fear." "Thanks for coming," Sarah replied, genuinely touched that the brothers had made the effort. "It means a lot to have you here." "Wouldn't have missed it," Don assured her. Besides, Mike's grandson was front and center. Kid was hanging on every word. Probably has a new career goal now. Sarah Johnson, bear attack survivor and science teacher extraordinaire. Sarah laughed, the sound free and natural in a way it hadn't been immediately after the attack. "Well, the job market for that particular combination is pretty limited, so I don't think I need to worry about competition." As they prepared to leave, Mike hesitated, then spoke with uncharacteristic openness. "You know, we think about that day a lot. Finding you in the water, all torn up but still fighting. Don and I have been fishing these lakes for 40 years, seen all kinds of things, but that's one memory that sticks with you." He gestured toward her scars. "You wear those well, like badges of something important." Sarah felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, unexpected emotion welling up at this simple acknowledgement. "Thank you," she managed, "for everything." The weeks following the presentation brought changes to Sarah's life that she hadn't anticipated. Local media coverage of her story generated interest beyond Ely, resulting in invitations to speak at outdoor education programs and wilderness safety workshops across Minnesota and neighboring states. She accepted some and declined others, balancing her growing role as an advocate with her primary identity as a teacher. Her students, initially fascinated primarily by the dramatic aspects of her bear encounter, began showing deeper interest in wildlife biology and conservation ethics. Class discussions about human-wildlife conflicts became more nuanced, with students considering perspectives beyond immediate human safety concerns. Sarah found herself developing new curriculum units that integrated her personal experience with broader ecological principles, her passion for teaching reignited by the connections she could now draw between academic concepts and lived reality. Physically, her recovery continued steadily. By spring, her left arm had regained most of its strength and mobility, though certain movements remained difficult and likely always would. The facial scars faded further, the livid pink softening to silvery, lines that caught the light when she turned her head but no longer dominated her appearance. People who hadn't known her before the attack often didn't notice them until they were pointed out. As winter released its grip on northern Minnesota and the forest began its annual awakening, Sarah found her thoughts returning to the bear. Emerging from hibernation, hungry and instinct-driven, perhaps in the same general area where their paths had crossed so violently the previous fall, she wondered if it remembered her as she remembered it, if some trace of their encounter remained in its animal consciousness. Though Officer Morales kept her informed of bear activity in the region, partly professional courtesy, partly genuine concern for Sarah's peace of mind, no further attacks were reported, and no single bear was ever conclusively identified as the one that had attacked her. Life in Ely continued its seasonal rhythms, the incident becoming part of local law, significant but contained, a reminder of wilderness realities rather than a cause for ongoing alarm. On a warm day in early May, nearly 8 months after the attack, Sarah found herself drawn to Lake Vermilion for the first time since that September morning. She hadn't planned the visit. She had been driving aimlessly, enjoying the spring sunshine when she realized her route had taken her to the public landing where the Erickson brothers had brought her ashore in their fishing boat. She parked and sat in her car for several minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, uncertain whether she was ready to face this particular memory. Then, with deliberate movements, she got out and walked to the wooden dock, its surface weathered by winter but solid beneath her feet. The lake stretched before her, vast and blue under the cloudless sky, ringed by forests now vibrant with spring growth. Sarah stood at the edge of the dock, where water lapped gently against the wooden pilings, and breathed deeply of the pine-scented air. The peace of the scene contrasted sharply with her last experience here, yet there was a continuity as well. The eternal lake, the ancient forests, the cyclical nature of life in this northern landscape. A movement on the distant shore caught her attention, a large dark shape emerging from the trees to stand at the water's edge. Even from this distance, Sarah recognized the distinctive profile of a black bear, possibly the very one that had attacked her, though there was no way to know for certain. The animal paused at the shoreline, then lowered its head to drink from the lake. Sarah watched, her heart rate accelerating, but not from fear, rather from a complex mixture of respect, wariness, and a strange sense of completion. The bear raised its head, water dripping from its muzzle, and seemed to look directly at her across the expanse of lake that separated them. For a long moment they regarded each other, woman and bear, connected by an encounter that had altered one life significantly and the other perhaps not at all. Then the bear turned and ambled back into the forest, disappearing among the trees. As silently as it had appeared, Sarah remained on the dock, watching the empty shoreline until the lengthening shadows reminded her of the hour. As she walked back to her car, she felt a subtle shift within herself, not an ending or even a resolution, but a realignment of her relationship with the wilderness she called home. The bear would continue its bearish existence, following instincts honed over millennia of evolution. Sarah would continue teaching, speaking, hiking cautiously but joyfully through the forests around Ely. They would share this landscape, predator and prey, wild and human, their brief, violent intersection, now just one thread in the complex tapestry of their respective lives. The scars on Sarah's body would fade further, but never disappear entirely. Physical reminders of a morning when the boundary between human and wild had momentarily dissolved. The psychological scars would likewise remain, surfacing in occasional nightmares or moments of hypervigilance in the woods. Yet these too were part of her now, integrated into the person she had become. Not Sarah Johnson, bear attack victim, but Sarah Johnson, survivor and teacher, changed by her experience, but not defined by it. As she drove away from Lake Vermilion, Sarah rolled down her window, allowing the spring air to fill the car. Somewhere in the forest, the bear continued its own journey, perhaps searching for food, perhaps establishing territory, perhaps simply following the ancient pathways of its species. Their paths had crossed once and might never cross again, but in the wilderness of northern Minnesota, they remained connected, two beings navigating their separate lives in a landscape both shared and divided, wild and civilized, dangerous and home. The crisp autumn air filled Sarah Jenkins' lungs as she jogged along the familiar trail in Shenandoah National Park. At 34, Sarah had made these early morning runs part of her daily routine for the past 3 years, ever since she'd moved to the small town of Elkton, Virginia, just 20 minutes from the park's eastern entrance. The rhythmic pounding of her trail runners against the packed dirt path created a soothing cadence that helped clear her mind before heading to her job as a physical therapist at the Regional Medical Center in Harrisonburg. It was 6:45 a.m. on a Tuesday in early October, and Sarah had arrived at the park just as dawn was breaking. She had paid the entrance fee at the unmanned station using her annual pass and parked her blue Honda Civic at the South River Falls trailhead parking lot. Only 2 other vehicles sat in the lot that morning, a forest green pickup truck with Virginia plates that Sarah recognized as belonging to Ray Winters, a retired park volunteer who often did early morning trail maintenance, and a silver Subaru Outback she didn't recognize. The air temperature hovered around 45 degrees, perfect for running, cold enough to keep her from overheating, but not so frigid that her muscles would tighten up. Sarah had chosen her usual 5-mile route that looped around one of the less traveled paths off the South River Falls Trail, though she knew the park recommended hiking with companions, especially in less populated areas. She had grown comfortable with this particular trail over the years and considered herself experienced enough to handle it alone. She always carried a small pack with essentials, her phone, a water bottle, a small first aid kit, a whistle, and a protein bar. What she didn't carry, and what she would later regret, was bear spray. As she ran, Sarah took in the changing colors of the forest. The maples had turned brilliant shades of red and orange, while the oaks were just beginning their transition to russet and gold. Fallen leaves crunched beneath her feet, adding to the symphony of forest sounds, the chirping of chickadees, the distant rat-tat-tat of a woodpecker, and the occasional rustling in the underbrush as squirrels and chipmunks went about their morning routines of gathering acorns and other nuts for the approaching winter. Sarah checked her GPS watch. She'd completed just over 2 miles in about 18 minutes, a decent pace considering the moderate elevation changes on this portion of the trail. As she approached a bend in the path where the trail narrowed and curved around a dense thicket of mountain laurel, she slowed her pace slightly. This section always required more attention due to exposed roots and loose rocks. She'd twisted her ankle here once before and had learned to be more cautious. The sun had risen higher now, filtering through the canopy and creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. Sarah paused briefly to take a few swallows from her water bottle. That's when she heard it, a soft huffing sound followed by the snap of a twig somewhere in the thick vegetation to her right. She froze, her senses suddenly heightened. In the 3 years she'd been running these trails, she'd encountered plenty of wildlife, white-tailed deer, wild turkeys, foxes, and once even a bobcat that had quickly disappeared into the underbrush. She'd also seen black bears, but always at a distance, and they had always moved away when they noticed her presence. The morning dew still clung to spider webs stretched between branches, catching the sunlight like strings of tiny diamonds. The beauty of it momentarily distracted Sarah from the sounds she'd heard. She recapped her water bottle, secured it in the side pocket of her small backpack, and was about to resume her run when a high-pitched whine emanated from the same direction as the previous sounds. Sarah's heartbeat quickened. That sound was unmistakable, a bear cub. Where there was a cub, a mother bear would be close by, very close by. The realization hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow. She was potentially between a mother bear and her cub, one of the most dangerous wildlife situations possible, especially during autumn when bears were actively foraging to prepare for winter. She recalled the park ranger's advice from a wilderness safety workshop she'd attended when she first started running in the park. If you encounter a black bear with cubs, don't run. Back away slowly while facing the bear. Make yourself look as large as possible and make noise to identify yourself as human. Black bears rarely attack humans, except when they feel threatened or when cubs are involved. Sarah was about to begin backing away when the underbrush to her left erupted. A second bear cub, no more than 30 pounds and covered in glossy black fur, scrambled onto the trail just 10 feet ahead of her. It stood on its hind legs, sniffing the air curiously, its round ears perked forward, apparently unaware of the human presence. Sarah realized with growing dread that she was now positioned between two cubs, the one she could see and the one she had heard in the vegetation to her right. Time seemed to slow as Sarah's mind raced through her options. She needed to leave the area immediately, but she had to do so without appearing to threaten either cub. She began to slowly back up, her eyes fixed on the cub on the trail, her hands raised to appear larger. "Hey, bear," she called out in a firm but calm voice. "I'm just passing through." The cub dropped to all fours and took a tentative step toward her, more curious than afraid. Sarah continued backing up, her heart hammering in her chest. "Hey, bear," she repeated, a bit louder this time. Suddenly, a deep, throaty growl came from the dense vegetation beyond the cub. The underbrush shook, and Sarah caught glimpses of black fur moving rapidly through the mountain laurel. The mother bear burst onto the trail in a blur of motion, covering the distance between her cub and Sarah with astonishing speed. She was massive, at least 300 pounds, with a broad head and powerful shoulders. Her lips were pulled back, revealing yellowed teeth as she charged. Her eyes locked on Sarah with unmistakable intent. Sarah had no time to think, only react. The mother bear was already too close for her to play dead. That strategy would only work once the initial attack was over. Against all the advice she'd heard, Sarah's instincts took over, and she turned to run. It was the worst possible decision. The sound of the bear's heavy breathing and pounding paws filled Sarah's ears as she sprinted down the trail. She knew she couldn't outrun a bear. They could reach speeds of 30 miles per hour, while even Olympic human sprinters topped out around 23. Her only hope was to reach a tree she could climb, or to somehow put enough distance between them that the bear would stop once it no longer perceived her as a threat to its cubs. Sarah rounded the bend in the trail, her lungs burning as she pushed herself harder than she ever had before. She spotted a tall oak with low-hanging branches about 20 yards ahead and made for it, knowing it was her best chance. Black bears were excellent climbers, but if she could get high enough, the bear might lose interest. She never made it to the tree. The impact knocked her forward and down, her face and chest slamming into the dirt trail as the bear's weight crashed onto her back. Sharp, searing pain tore through her left shoulder as the bear's powerful jaws clamped down. Sarah screamed, the sound echoing through the forest. The bear shook her violently, teeth penetrating through her light-running jacket and into the flesh beneath. In that moment, Sarah remembered another piece of advice from the park rangers. If a black bear attacks and you can't escape, fight back with everything you have. Target the eyes and nose. Black bears are less likely to persist in an attack than grizzlies when met with strong resistance. Summoning every ounce of strength and courage, Sarah twisted under the bear's weight and struck out blindly behind her, her fingers curled into claws. She felt her nails connect with something soft, the bear's nose or eyes, she couldn't tell which, and the animal let out a startled huff, momentarily loosening its grip. Sarah tried to scramble away, but the bear pounced again, this time seizing her by the right shoulder. The pain was excruciating, radiating down her arm and across her back. She could feel hot blood soaking through her clothing and running down her skin. The bear dragged her several feet across the trail before releasing her again. In that brief moment of reprieve, Sarah recalled another critical piece of advice. If fighting doesn't work, play dead. With the bear momentarily distracted, possibly checking to see if its cubs were safe, Sarah curled into a fetal position, clasped her hands behind her neck to protect her spine, and remained absolutely still. She could taste dirt and blood in her mouth and feel the warm stickiness spreading across her back, but she forced herself to remain motionless, barely breathing. The bear circled her, huffing and growling. Sarah kept her eyes closed, focusing on appearing as unthreatening as possible. She felt the bear's hot breath on her neck as it sniffed her, its powerful presence looming over her broken body. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to run, to fight, but she remained still, even as the bear pressed a heavy paw against her side, rolling her slightly. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute, the bear gave a final huff and moved away. Sarah remained frozen in position, afraid that any movement might trigger another attack. She could hear the bear vocalizing softly, a series of grunts that she assumed were directed at its cubs. The sounds gradually grew more distant as the bear family moved off the trail and back into the forest. Still, Sarah didn't move. She had read that bears sometimes watch from a distance to see if their victim was truly incapacitated. Only when she could no longer hear any signs of the bear did she dare to open her eyes. Pain washed over her in waves, and she could feel her consciousness beginning to fade at the edges. She needed help, and quickly. With trembling hands, she reached for her small backpack, which had somehow remained attached to one shoulder during the attack. Her fingers felt numb and clumsy as she fumbled for her phone. When she finally extracted it, she nearly wept with relief to see it was undamaged. Her hands were covered in blood, making the screen difficult to operate, but she managed to dial 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's calm voice seemed to come from another world. Bear attack, Sarah gasped, her voice barely audible. South River Falls Trail, Shenandoah National Park. I'm about 2.5 miles from the trailhead. Need help. Each word was an effort, her breathing shallow and pained. Ma'am, can you confirm your location? You're on the South River Falls Trail in Shenandoah National Park? The dispatcher's voice remained steady. Yes, Sarah whispered. I have a GPS app. Coordinates. She struggled to access the app with her bloodied fingers, finally managing to read off her location. Please hurry. Lost a lot of blood. I'm dispatching park rangers and emergency medical services right now, the dispatcher assured her. Can you tell me about your injuries? Bear bit both shoulders. Back too, I think. Bleeding badly. Sarah's vision was beginning to blur, the forest around her seeming to tilt and spin. Is the bear still in the area? The dispatcher asked. Gone, I think. Played dead. It left. Speaking was becoming more difficult, each word requiring immense effort. You did exactly the right thing, the dispatcher said, her voice taking on a note of urgency. I need you to stay on the line with me. Help is on the way. Can you apply pressure to your wounds? Sarah tried to reach behind her to her shoulders, but cried out at the movement. Can't reach. Hurts too much. That's okay, the dispatcher soothed. Just stay still and conserve your energy. Tell me your name. Sarah Jenkins. Her teeth had begun to chatter despite the fact that she didn't feel cold. Shock was setting in. Sarah, the rangers know exactly where you are. They're on their way with medical personnel. I'm going to stay on the phone with you until they reach you. Can you tell me if you're alone on the trail? Yes. Morning run. No one else. Sarah closed her eyes, suddenly overwhelmed by fatigue. She wanted nothing more than to sleep. Sarah, I need you to stay awake. The dispatcher's voice grew firmer. Talk to me. Tell me why you were on the trail this morning. I run here most mornings, before work. Physical therapist. Sarah forced her eyes open, knowing that falling asleep could be dangerous in her condition. That's good, Sarah. What hospital do you work at? Rockingham Memorial, in Harrisonburg. The pain was constant now, a burning sensation across her shoulders and back that seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. I know that place. My sister had her baby there last year, the dispatcher said, clearly trying to keep Sarah engaged. The medical team is making good progress. They should reach you soon. Can you hear anything around you? Sarah listened, focusing beyond the ringing in her ears. Birds, wind in the trees, no bear sounds. She paused, summoning more strength. Water, I think. The trail crosses a stream nearby. That's really helpful information, Sarah. The rangers will be listening for the water too. It will help them find you faster. Sarah wasn't sure how much time passed as she lay there, drifting in and out of awareness despite the dispatcher's continued efforts to keep her conscious. The forest sounds blended with the dispatcher's voice, creating a surreal backdrop to her pain. Then, cutting through her haze, she heard something new, voices calling her name, and the sound of rapid footsteps on the trail. I think they're here, she managed to tell the dispatcher. Moments later, she was surrounded by park rangers in their distinctive uniforms and emergency medical technicians in high-visibility vests. Gentle hands assessed her injuries while someone took the phone and spoke briefly to the dispatcher before ending the call. Sarah, I'm Ranger Mike Dawson. We're going to take care of you. A calm, authoritative voice said. Can you tell me what happened? Cubs, Sarah whispered. Came between mother and cubs. She charged, tried to run. Bad mistake. Speaking took all her remaining energy. You're going to be okay, the ranger assured her as the medical team worked swiftly to stabilize her. One EMT was cutting away her blood-soaked clothing to better access her wounds, while another was inserting an IV line into her arm. These are significant lacerations and puncture wounds, Sarah heard one of the medics say to the ranger. She's lost a considerable amount of blood. We need to get her out of here fast. Chopper's on the way, another voice responded. ETA 7 minutes to the nearest clearing large enough for landing. Sarah felt herself being carefully rolled onto a backboard, each movement sending fresh waves of pain through her body, despite the medic's gentle handling. Straps secured her to the board, and then she was being lifted. The forest canopy above moved past her field of vision, as the rescue team began carrying her down the trail. "Sarah, we're taking you to a clearing where a helicopter can land," Ranger Dawson explained, walking alongside the stretcher. "From there, you'll be airlifted to the University of Virginia Medical Center in Charlottesville. They have a level 1 trauma center that's best equipped to handle your injuries. Do you understand?" Sarah managed a slight nod, which even that small movement sent spikes of pain through her shoulders. "Can you tell me anything else about the bear?" the ranger asked. "Was it tagged or marked in any way that you noticed?" Sarah tried to think back to those terrifying moments. "No tag, just big, female, 2 cubs." Her voice was fading as the pain medication the EMTs had administered began to take effect. "You're doing great, Sarah," the ranger encouraged her. "We'll need a fuller statement later, but for now just focus on staying with us." The journey to the clearing seemed both instantaneous and endless to Sarah, her perception of time distorted by shock, pain, and medication. She was vaguely aware of the changing light as they moved from the dense forest to a more open area, and then the distinctive thump-thump-thump of helicopter blades growing louder. Wind whipped around them as the medical helicopter descended. Into the clearing, blowing leaves and debris in swirling patterns, Sarah caught glimpses of the white and blue aircraft with UVA Pegasus emblazoned on its side before she was swiftly transferred from the Park Service stretcher to the helicopter's medical equipment. A flight medic leaned over her, checking her vital signs and adjusting the IV. "Sarah, I'm Carlos. We're flying you to UVA Medical Center. It's about a 15-minute flight. I'll be monitoring you the whole way. You're in good hands." The helicopter doors closed, and the noise intensified as they lifted off. Through the window, Sarah caught a last glimpse of Shenandoah National Park, the rolling mountains covered in autumn foliage, the winding ribbon of Skyline Drive visible in the distance, the forest that had been her sanctuary, now the site of her nightmare. Then the helicopter banked, and all she could see was blue sky. Carlos worked efficiently in the confined space, checking her wounds and administering additional medication. "Your blood pressure is lower than we'd like," he explained. "We're giving you fluids and something for the pain. Try to stay awake if you can, but don't worry if you drift off. We're monitoring you closely." Sarah tried to nod, but found she lacked the strength. The medication was making her thoughts fuzzy, the pain receding to a dull roar rather than the sharp agony of before. As the helicopter raced towards Charlottesville, Sarah's mind wandered back to that morning, trying to identify what she could have done differently. Should she have been making more noise as she ran? Should she have taken a different trail? Should she have been carrying bear spray? The questions swirled in her mind without answers as consciousness slipped away. The next thing Sarah was aware of was a different kind of noise, the beeping of medical equipment, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, the murmur of professional voices. She opened her eyes to bright fluorescent lights and the sterile white ceiling of a trauma bay. Medical personnel in scrubs moved around her with practiced efficiency. Someone noticed her open eyes. "She's conscious," a voice announced. A moment later, a face appeared above her, a woman with kind eyes above a surgical mask. "Sarah, I'm Dr. Patel. You're at the University of Virginia Medical Center. You've been attacked by a bear and have significant injuries to your shoulders and back. We're preparing to take you to surgery to clean and repair the wounds. Do you understand?" Sarah tried to speak, but found her mouth too dry. A nurse held a straw to her lips and she took a small sip of water. "Yes," she finally managed. "Surgery, I understand." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, weak and distant. "Good," Dr. Patel said. "The anesthesiologist is going to give you something now to put you to sleep. When you wake up, the surgery will be over, and you'll be in the recovery room. Do you have any questions before we proceed?" Sarah thought for a moment, fighting through the fog of pain medication. "How bad is it?" she asked. Dr. Patel's expression was serious but not grim. "You have deep lacerations and puncture wounds to both shoulders and your upper back. There's significant tissue damage and we're concerned about infection. Wild animal bites have a high risk of introducing bacteria. We'll be cleaning the wounds thoroughly, repairing what tissue we can, and starting you on strong antibiotics. There's also some concern about potential nerve damage in your left shoulder, but we won't know the full extent until we're in surgery." She paused. "You've lost a considerable amount of blood, but you reached help in time, with proper treatment and rehabilitation. We expect you to recover, though it may be a long process." Sarah absorbed this information, trying to process what it might mean for her future, her job as a physical therapist, her running, her independence. Before she could ask anything else, the anesthesiologist approached. "I'm Dr. Ramirez, the anesthesiologist," he introduced himself. "I'm going to give you something through your IV now." Just relax and count backward from 10 for me. 10, 9, 8. Sarah felt a cool sensation spreading up her arm from the IV site. 7, 6. The room began to fade. 5, and then nothing. When Sarah next opened her eyes, the quality of light had changed. Softer, natural light filtered through vertical blinds on a window to her right. She was in a different room, a regular hospital room rather than the trauma bay. The beeping of monitors was still present, but less intrusive somehow. She tried to move and was immediately reminded of her injuries by a sharp pain that radiated across her shoulders and back. "Easy there," a voice cautioned. A nurse in blue scrubs approached the bed. "You're in the ICU. The surgery went well, but you need to stay still to avoid pulling at your stitches." Sarah licked her dry lips. "Water?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The nurse held a cup with a straw to her mouth, supporting Sarah's head slightly to help her drink. The cool water was blissful on her parched throat. "What time is it?" Sarah asked, after she'd had enough. "Water. Just after 7 p.m., the nurse replied. "Tuesday evening. You've been in surgery and recovery for most of the day." Tuesday evening. The attack had happened Tuesday morning, less than 12 hours ago, though it felt like a lifetime had passed. Sarah tried to take stock of her condition. She was lying on her side, presumably to keep pressure off her wounded back and shoulders. Multiple IV lines ran into her arms, delivering fluids, antibiotics, and pain medication. She could feel the bulk of bandages covering her upper body. "The doctor will be in soon to check on you," the nurse explained as she adjusted something on one of the monitors. "In the meantime, there are some people waiting to speak with you when you're feeling up to it, the park rangers and a wildlife officer, but they can wait until tomorrow if you're not ready." Sarah considered this. Part of her wanted to put off the conversation to retreat into sleep and pain medication, but another part wanted to process what had happened, to begin making sense of the traumatic event. "I can talk to them," she decided, "but maybe just briefly." The nurse nodded. "I'll let them know. They've been waiting most of the day." She finished checking Sarah's vital signs and made a note in the electronic chart. "Your family has been called. Your parents are driving down from Pennsylvania. They should be here sometime tonight." Sarah's parents. She hadn't even thought about them. They would be beside themselves with worry. "Thank you," she said to the nurse, unable to manage more. After the nurse left, Sarah lay quietly, trying to piece together the fragmented memories of the attack. It had happened so quickly, yet certain moments stood out with terrible clarity. The mother bear's eyes fixed on her with primal intensity, the crushing weight as it pounced, the searing pain of teeth penetrating her flesh, the copper taste of blood in her mouth as she lay motionless on the forest floor. She was drawn from these dark recollections by a knock at the door. Ranger Mike Dawson entered, still in his uniform but looking more tired than he had on the trail. With him was a woman in the khaki uniform of the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. "Ms. Jenkins," Ranger Dawson said softly, "I'm glad to see you awake. I'm the ranger who helped coordinate your rescue this morning. This is Officer Tina Rodriguez from the Department of Wildlife Resources. We'd like to ask you a few questions about what happened, if you feel up to it. We'll keep it brief." Sarah nodded slightly, the movement sending a twinge of pain through her shoulder. "I remember you," she said, "from the trail." Ranger Dawson pulled up a chair beside her bed, while Officer Rodriguez remained standing, a small notebook in hand. "Can you walk us through what happened this morning?" Dawson asked. Sarah recounted the events as best she could, her familiar morning run, hearing the cub, the second cub appearing on the trail, the mother bear's charge, her instinctive but ill-advised decision to run, the attack itself, and finally her decision to play dead, which likely saved her life. Officer Rodriguez took notes throughout Sarah's account, occasionally asking for clarification about the bear's size, behavior, or distinguishing features. When Sarah finished, the wildlife officer asked, "Did you notice if the mother bear had any tags in her ears or a radio collar? Anything that would indicate she was being tracked by wildlife services?" Sarah shook her head slightly. "No tags or collar that I saw. Just a large black bear, adult female. 2 cubs about the size of medium dogs." Ranger Dawson and Officer Rodriguez exchanged glances. "Based on the location and your description, we believe we know which bear family this is," Ranger Dawson said. "There's a female with 2 cubs that's been spotted regularly in that area this fall. No previous reports of aggressive behavior, though. What will happen to them?" Sarah asked, surprised by her own concern for the animals that had nearly killed her. Officer Rodriguez's expression was professional but compassionate. "That's what we need to determine. Our policy is not to automatically euthanize bears involved. in attacks, especially when the bear was defending her cubs. We take into account the specifics of each incident. The bear was protecting her young, Sarah said quietly. I was between her and one of her cubs. She was doing what came naturally. Officer Rodriguez nodded. That's an important factor in our assessment. We're currently monitoring the area with trail cameras to identify and track the bear family. We've closed that section of trail temporarily while we conduct our investigation. We'd like to get a full written statement from you when you're feeling better, Ranger Dawson added. But this initial information is very helpful. Is there anything else you can think of that might be relevant? Sarah thought for a moment. I've run that trail dozens of times and seen bears before, but always at a distance. They've always moved away. I should have been more careful. Should have made more noise while running. Should have been carrying bear spray. Her voice caught, emotions suddenly welling up as the reality of what had happened and how much worse it could have been hit her fully. You can't blame yourself, Ranger Dawson said firmly. This kind of encounter is rare, even in areas with healthy bear populations. And you did a lot of things right. You recognized the danger immediately. You tried to back away and identify yourself as human, and most importantly, you knew to play dead when the initial attack didn't stop. That knowledge saved your life. Sarah blinked back tears, not entirely convinced but appreciative of his attempt to absolve her of guilt. Officer Rodriguez put away her notebook. We won't take any more of your time today. You need your rest, but we may have additional questions as our investigation proceeds. What about other people on the trails? Sarah asked. Is there a general danger? We've posted warnings at all trailheads in the area, Ranger Dawson replied, and as I mentioned, we've temporarily closed the specific trail where the attack occurred. Park visitors are being advised to make noise while hiking, travel in groups, and carry bear spray. But we don't consider this an elevated threat to the general public. Bears almost never seek out human encounters, and attacks are extremely rare. After the officers left, Sarah was examined by Dr. Patel, who explained the extent of her injuries and the procedures that had been performed during surgery. The bear's teeth had left deep puncture wounds and lacerations across both shoulders and her upper back. The left shoulder had sustained the most serious damage, with tears to the muscle tissue and potential nerve involvement. The wounds had been thoroughly cleaned and irrigated to prevent infection, with special attention to removing any foreign material that might have been introduced by the bear's mouth. Drains had been placed to prevent fluid buildup, and the wounds had been sutured where possible, though some areas would need to heal from the inside out due to the nature of the tissue damage. You're going to need several days in the hospital, Dr. Patel informed her. We need to monitor for infection and make sure the wounds are healing properly before we can discharge you. After that, you're looking at several weeks of recovery at home before you can return to work, and then physical therapy to restore full range of motion in your shoulders. Given your profession, you understand the importance of proper rehabilitation. Sarah did understand all too well. As a physical therapist, she had worked with patients recovering from various injuries, including animal attacks, though none as severe as her own. She knew the long road that lay ahead, the pain of rebuilding strength and mobility, the psychological hurdles of trusting her body again after trauma. Will I regain full function? She asked, the question that had been haunting her since she regained consciousness. Dr. Patel's expression was cautious, but not hopeless. It's too early to say with certainty. The damage to your right shoulder is less severe, and I expect a near-complete recovery there with proper rehabilitation. The left shoulder is more complicated due to the deeper tissue damage and possible nerve involvement. We'll know more as the healing progresses, and we can better assess the extent of any nerve injury. She paused. Given your age and excellent physical condition prior to the attack, you have significant factors in your favor. But I won't sugarcoat it. This is a serious injury, and recovery will take time and dedication. Sarah absorbed this information, mentally preparing herself for the challenge ahead. She had helped countless patients navigate their own recovery journeys. Now she would be the one needing guidance and support. Later that evening, her parents arrived. Her father, Jeffrey, a retired high school science teacher, and her mother, Helen, a librarian. They entered her hospital room with the tentative movements of people afraid of causing additional pain, their faces etched with worry and fatigue from the 4-hour drive from their home in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. "Oh, Sarah," her mother whispered, carefully taking Sarah's hand, one of the few parts of her that wasn't bandaged or connected to medical equipment. When we got the call, she couldn't continue, tears filling her eyes. "I'm okay, Mom," Sarah assured her, though they all knew it wasn't entirely true. "The doctors say I'll recover." Her father stood at the foot of the bed, his normally jovial face solemn. "What happened exactly?" "They told us you were attacked by a bear, but not much more than that." Sarah explained the encounter again, giving them a simplified version that emphasized her survival rather than the terrifying details of the attack itself. She knew they were imagining it anyway, probably conjuring scenarios even worse than the reality. "I've always worried about you running alone on those trails," her mother said, unable to keep the note of "I told you so" completely out of her voice. "Helen," her father warned quietly. "No, Mom's right," Sarah conceded. "It was a risk I was taking. I just never thought." She trailed off, remembering the countless mornings she had enjoyed on those same trails without incident, the peace and solitude she had found there, the connection with nature that had become so important to her mental well-being. "Well, you won't be doing that anymore," her mother stated firmly. Sarah didn't argue. She couldn't imagine returning to those isolated trails anytime soon, perhaps ever. The forest that had been her sanctuary now seemed filled with hidden dangers. But that was a concern for another day. For now, she needed to focus on the immediate challenge of recovery. Her parents stayed until visiting hours ended, promising to return first thing in the morning. They had booked a hotel room nearby and planned to stay for at least a week to help once she was discharged. Sarah was grateful for their support, though she already worried about the inevitable tensions that would arise from having her parents in her small one-bedroom apartment in Elkton. Her mother's tendency to hover and her father's awkwardness around illness would be challenges in themselves. After they left, Sarah was alone with her thoughts and the constant background noise of the ICU. Night had fallen outside her window, and the hospital had quieted somewhat, though never completely. Nurses came and went, checking her vital signs, adjusting her position slightly to prevent pressure sores, administering medications. Each movement, no matter how gentle, sent waves of pain through her injured shoulders and back. Despite the pain medication, sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the bear charging toward her, felt its weight crashing down on her back, smelled its wild, musky odor as it stood over her. Her body would tense in remembered terror, causing fresh pain from her wounds. She found herself listening for forest sounds that couldn't possibly be present in her hospital room. The huffing of a bear, the cracking of twigs under heavy paws, the rustling of underbrush as a predator approached. A night nurse noticed her, distressed during one of the regular checks. "Can't sleep?" she asked sympathetically. Sarah shook her head slightly. "Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there with the bear." The nurse nodded, understanding. "That's common after trauma. Your body and mind are still processing what happened." She checked Sarah's IV lines. "I can give you something to help you sleep if you'd like." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. She needed rest if she was going to begin healing both physically and mentally. The nurse added medication to her IV. "This should help. And Sarah, what you're experiencing, the flashbacks, the anxiety, that's a normal response to what you've been through. Don't try to fight it or feel like you need to be stronger than you are. It takes time to process trauma." "I know," Sarah said quietly. "I've worked with patients who've experienced traumatic injuries. I've given that same advice. It's just different when you're the one experiencing it." "It always is," the nurse agreed. "Try to rest now. The medication should start working soon." As the sedative began to take effect, Sarah's thoughts became less coherent, the images of the bear attack losing their sharp edges. Just before sleep claimed her completely, a new thought surfaced. Would she ever feel safe in the forest again? Would she ever find joy in running those trails, or would fear now be her constant companion in the wilderness? The questions lingered. As she drifted into a medicated sleep, deep enough to keep the nightmares at bay, at least for now, Sarah spent 5 days in the hospital, gradually improving enough to be moved from the ICU to a regular room. The doctors were pleased with her progress. No signs of infection had developed, her vital signs were stable, and the wounds were beginning to heal properly, though she would be left with significant scarring across her shoulders and upper back. During this time, she received visits from colleagues at the medical center where she worked, all of whom expressed shock and sympathy at what had happened. The local newspaper ran a small article about the attack, and a reporter attempted to interview her, but was turned away by hospital staff at Sarah's request. She wasn't ready to become a public spectacle, to have her trauma dissected for human interest value. Ranger Dawson returned with Officer Rodriguez to take her formal statement about the attack, bringing photographs of several black bears for her to identify. Sarah immediately recognized the bear that had attacked her in one of the images, a large female with a distinctive white patch on her chest. "That's her," Sarah said with certainty, her heart rate increasing just at the sight of the animal, even in a photograph. The white marking on her chest. I remember seeing that when she stood up after the initial attack. Officer Rodriguez nodded. We thought so. She's known to us. We've been tracking her movements for about 3 years. She's approximately 7 years old and has had 3 sets of cubs in that time. This year's cubs are her 3rd litter. Havkay, you found her? Sarah asked. Yes, Ranger Dawson confirmed. The bear family has moved to a different part of their territory, about 2 miles from where the attack occurred. We've been monitoring them with trail cameras. What will happen to them? Sarah asked again, still finding it strange that she cared about the fate of the animal that had nearly killed her. Officer Rodriguez seemed to understand her conflicted feelings. After reviewing your account and other evidence, we've determined this was a defensive attack. The bear was protecting her cubs from a perceived threat, you, and once she no longer considered you a threat, she left, rather than continuing the attack or returning to it. This aligns with normal protective behavior rather than predatory aggression. So you won't euthanize her, Sarah clarified. No, Officer Rodriguez said. Our policy reserves euthanasia for bears showing predatory behavior toward humans, or bears that have become dangerously habituated to human food sources. Neither applies in this case. We will, however, continue to monitor this bear family closely for the remainder of the season. Sarah felt a surprising sense of relief. Despite everything, she didn't want the bear destroyed for acting on its natural instincts to protect its young. The forest was the bear's home. She had been the visitor, the intruder. On the 6th day, after the attack, Sarah was discharged from the hospital with prescriptions for antibiotics, pain medication, and strict instructions for wound care. Her parents drove her back to her apartment in Elkton, having already stocked her refrigerator with prepared meals and rearranged her furniture to accommodate her limited mobility. The first few days at home were a difficult adjustment. Simple. Tasks like dressing, showering, or preparing food became monumental challenges with her injured shoulders. Her parents helped as much as they could, but there was an awkwardness to having them assist with such personal care. Her mother tried not to hover but couldn't quite help herself, while her father retreated into practical tasks, fixing the dripping bathroom faucet, reorganizing her kitchen cabinets for easier access, installing additional lighting in hallways to prevent falls. Pain was Sarah's constant companion despite the medication. The wounds pulled and burned with every movement, and she found herself holding her upper body rigid to minimize discomfort, which only created new problems in her neck and lower back. As a physical therapist, she knew the importance of maintaining mobility even during recovery, but knowing what to do and being able to do it were entirely different matters. Sleep remained elusive, disrupted by pain when she inadvertently rolled onto her injured shoulders, and by nightmares when she did manage to drift off. In her dreams, she was always running through endless forest trails, the sound of the bears breathing close behind her, unable to find her way out of the woods. A week after returning home, Sarah had her first follow-up appointment at the UVA Medical Center. Dr. Patel examined the healing wounds, removed some of the stitches, and ordered new imaging studies of her left shoulder to assess the potential nerve damage that remained their primary concern. The wounds are healing well, Dr. Patel informed her after the examination. No signs of infection, which is excellent news given the nature of the injuries. How's your pain level? Manageable with medication, Sarah replied. Worse in the morning and evening, better during the day when I'm moving around more. As long as I don't overdo it. Dr. Patel nodded. That's a common pattern. And how about sleep? Sarah hesitated. Not great. Combination of physical discomfort and nightmares. Also common after trauma, Dr. Patel said. I'm going to refer you to Dr. Winters, one of our psychologists who specializes in trauma recovery. Physical healing is just one part of the process. After an experience like yours, Sarah nodded, recognizing the wisdom in this approach even as she felt a reflexive resistance to the idea of therapy. She had always prided herself on her self-sufficiency, her ability to handle challenges on her own. But this was different. The bear attack had shaken her in ways that went beyond the physical injuries. What about work? Sarah asked. When can I expect to return? Dr. Patel considered this carefully. Given the nature of your job as a physical therapist, which requires significant upper body strength and dexterity, I'd estimate at least 6 to 8 more weeks before you can return, even on light duty. And that's assuming your recovery continues without complications. 6 to 8 more weeks. The time frame hit Sarah hard. She had been hoping for a quicker return to normalcy, to the routine that had structured her life before the attack. 2 Months of being sidelined, dependent on others, unable to perform the work that gave her such satisfaction, seemed an eternity. "I know that's not what you wanted to hear," Dr. Patel said, observing her reaction, "but pushing too soon could result in setbacks that would extend your recovery even further. Your body needs time to heal and your profession is physically demanding." "I understand," Sarah said, trying to accept this reality. "What about the nerve damage in my left shoulder? Any more clarity on the extent of it?" Dr. Patel pulled up the results of the imaging studies on her computer. "There's definitely some nerve involvement. The EMG studies show decreased conduction in the axillary nerve and parts of the brachial plexus. This explains the weakness and occasional numbness you've been experiencing in your left arm." She turned to face Sarah directly. "The good news is that there doesn't appear to be complete severing of any major nerves. The damage appears to be from compression and stretching during the attack. This type of injury often heals, though it can take several months, and the recovery may not be complete." Sarah nodded, absorbing this information. As a physical therapist, she understood the implications better than most patients would. Nerve injuries were notoriously slow to heal, and recovery could be partial and unpredictable. She would need to be patient and diligent with her rehabilitation. Before leaving the hospital, Sarah stopped by the office of Dr. Winters, the trauma psychologist Dr. Patel had mentioned. Though she couldn't see her immediately, Dr. Winters was able to schedule an appointment for the following week and provided Sarah with some resources on post-traumatic stress and recovery in the meantime. The drive back to Elkton with her parents was quiet, Sarah lost in thought about the long recovery ahead. The autumn countryside passed outside the car window, rolling hills covered in the red and gold foliage that had seemed so beautiful just weeks ago, but now reminded her of the forest where her life had nearly ended. When they passed the entrance to Shenandoah National Park, Sarah found herself unable to look, turning her face away until they had moved beyond it. That evening, after a simple dinner her mother had prepared, Sarah sat on her small balcony, overlooking the back garden of her apartment complex. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the neatly mowed lawn and the row of ornamental cherry trees along the property line. In the distance, the Blue Ridge Mountains were silhouetted against the darkening sky, the same mountains that housed the national park, the same forest where the bears roamed. Her father joined her carrying 2 mugs of herbal tea. He handed one to Sarah before taking the seat beside her. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Your mother's worried about you," he finally said. "Not just the physical injuries. She thinks you should move back to Lancaster, at least temporarily." Sarah sighed. She had been expecting this suggestion. "I know she is, but I can't run home every time life gets difficult. My job is here. My life is here. Nobody would think less of you," her father pointed out, "after what you've been through." "Dad," Sarah interrupted gently, "I appreciate the concern. I really do, but I need to work through this here in my own space. Running away won't help me process what happened or rebuild my confidence." Her father nodded, accepting her decision even if he didn't fully agree with it. "You've always been independent, even as a little girl." He smiled at some distant memory. "Remember when you were 7 and decided you were going to climb that big oak tree in the backyard? Your mother told you it was too high, but you were determined." Sarah smiled at the recollection. "I made it almost to the top before I got scared." "And then you got yourself down without any help," her father added. "You were so proud of yourself. Your mother was just relieved you hadn't broken your neck." He paused. "You've always pushed yourself, Sarah. Always wanted to prove you could. Do things on your own. It's not a bad quality, but sometimes it's okay to lean on others," Sarah finished for him. "I know, and I'm trying. Letting you and Mom come down here, help me out. That's not easy for me." "We know," her father said simply. "We're just glad to be able to help." He sipped his tea. "So what's the plan going forward with your recovery?" Sarah outlined what the doctors had told her, the expected timeline, the physical therapy regimen she would need to follow, the psychological counseling to address the trauma. "It's going to be a long road," she concluded. "Longer than I initially thought, but I'll get there." Her father reached over and carefully placed his hand on her uninjured forearm. "Of course you will, and we'll be here for whatever you need, for as long as you need us." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for her parents' unwavering support, even as she worried about the strain her prolonged dependency would place on their relationship. They had always respected her independence. This new dynamic would be an adjustment for all of them. As darkness settled completely over the landscape, Sarah found her gaze drawn again to the distant mountains, barely visible now as a darker shadow against the night sky. Somewhere in those forests, The bear that had attacked her was going about its nightly activities, perhaps foraging for acorns with its cubs, building up fat reserves for the coming winter, untroubled by memories of the human it had encountered. On the trail. For the bear, the attack had been a momentary instinctive response to a perceived threat, forgotten as soon as the danger passed. For Sarah, it had been a life-altering trauma that would shape her future in ways she was only beginning to understand. The days fell into a pattern as October gave way to November. Sarah's parents stayed for 2 weeks before reluctantly returning to Pennsylvania, extracting promises from her to call daily and to ask for help when needed. Her colleagues from the medical center organized a meal train, ensuring she had regular deliveries of home-cooked food. Twice a week, she returned to UVA Medical Center for physical therapy sessions and wound care, the hour-long drive each way taking a toll on her still recovering body. The physical therapy was grueling but necessary, starting with gentle, passive, range of motion exercises to prevent the formation of restrictive scar tissue. Her therapist, Marcus, gradually introduced more challenging activities designed to rebuild strength and mobility in her injured shoulders. Sarah found it strange to be on the receiving end of the same type of therapy she had provided to countless patients over the years. She knew exactly what Marcus was doing and why, could anticipate his instructions before he gave them, yet still struggled with the emotional aspects of being the patient rather than the practitioner. "You're making good progress," Marcus told her during a session in mid-November, about 6 weeks after the attack, especially with the right shoulder. "The left is still lagging, but that's to be expected given the nerve involvement." Sarah nodded, toweling off the sweat from a particularly challenging set of exercises. "The numbness in my left arm seems to be improving, less frequent anyway, but the strength just isn't coming back as quickly as I'd hoped." Marcus made a note in her chart. "Nerve regeneration takes time. You know that better than most patients." He grinned. "It's actually a bit intimidating having you as a patient. You probably could design this rehab program as well as I could." Sarah returned his smile. "Maybe, but I wouldn't be able to implement it on myself. It's different when you're the one in pain." She rotated her left shoulder cautiously, feeling the now familiar pull of the healing tissue. "How soon do you think I could return to work?" "Light duty only, of course." Marcus considered the question. "If you continue at this pace, maybe another 2 to 3 weeks, but you'd need to be very selective about which patients you work with. No transferring or supporting heavier patients, no demonstrations requiring significant upper body strength." Sarah sighed but nodded her acceptance. Initially, the doctors had estimated 6 to 8 weeks before she could return to work. They were now approaching the outer limit of that time frame, and she was still not ready. The financial implications were starting to worry her. Her health insurance was covering most of the medical expenses, and she had some short-term disability coverage through her employer, but it amounted to only 60% of her regular salary. Her savings were beginning to dwindle. That concern was compounded by the psychological impact of the extended recovery period. Dr. Winters, the trauma psychologist, had diagnosed her with post-traumatic stress disorder, a term Sarah had been familiar with professionally but never expected to apply to herself. The nightmares continued, sometimes waking her multiple times in a night. She had developed a hypervigilance that left her constantly scanning her environment for potential threats, and she startled easily at unexpected movements or sounds. Most troubling to her was the flashback she'd experienced when a large dog had bounded toward her in the hospital parking lot, a friendly golden retriever simply greeting a newcomer. But in that moment, all Sarah had seen was a charging predator. She had frozen in terror, unable to move or speak until the dog's owner had called it back, apologizing for the animal's exuberant behavior. "I used to love dogs," Sarah had told Dr. Winters during their next session. "Now I can't even look at a golden retriever without my heart racing. What does that say about me?" "It says you experienced a life-threatening animal attack and your brain is working overtime to protect you from similar threats," Dr. Winters had replied. "It's not a character flaw, Sarah. It's your brain's alarm system doing exactly what it evolved to do, identify potential dangers based on past experiences. With time and the right therapeutic approaches, we can help recalibrate that system." Those therapeutic approaches included cognitive behavioral techniques to manage anxiety, gradual exposure exercises to reduce reactivity to triggers, and narrative therapy to help Sarah integrate the traumatic experience into her broader life story. Sarah approached these psychological interventions with the same determination she brought to her physical rehabilitation, though she often found the emotional work more challenging than the physical pain of rebuilding muscle strength. By early December, Sarah had progressed enough to begin a limited return to work at the medical center, initially working just 3 half-days per week with carefully selected patients who required minimal physical assistance. Being back in the familiar environment of the therapy department lifted her spirits, giving her a sense of purpose and normalcy that had been missing during the long weeks of recovery at home. Her colleagues welcomed her warmly, but respected her limitations, stepping in without comment when a task exceeded her current capabilities. It was during this transitional period, as she was cautiously rebuilding her professional life, that Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Officer Rodriguez of the Department of Wildlife Resources. "Ms. Jenkins," the wildlife officer greeted her, "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I wanted to update you on the situation with the bear involved in your attack." Sarah's heart quickened at the mention of the bear, but she kept her voice steady. "No, it's fine. What's the situation?" "We've been monitoring the bear family throughout the fall, as I mentioned we would," Officer Rodriguez explained. "The mother and cubs have remained in their territory without any further concerning interactions with humans. With winter approaching, they've entered a den site about 4 miles from where your encounter occurred." "They're hibernating now?" Sarah asked. "Semi-hibernating," Officer Rodriguez clarified. "Black bears don't truly hibernate like some other species. They enter a state called torpor. Their metabolism slows, and they can go for weeks without eating, drinking, or eliminating waste, but they remain somewhat alert and can rouse if disturbed. The mother and cubs will likely remain in their den until March or April, depending on the weather." Sarah considered this information. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, not unkindly, but genuinely curious about the purpose of the call. "2 reasons," Officer Rodriguez replied. "First, we've completed our investigation of the incident and officially classified it as a defensive attack, requiring no management action toward the bear. I wanted you to know that conclusion." She paused. Second, we're organizing some additional training sessions for park visitors on bear safety, and I wondered if you might be willing to share your experience as part of these presentations." The request caught Sarah off guard. "You want me to talk about the attack? Your first-hand account would be extremely valuable," Officer Rodriguez said. "Many park visitors don't take bear safety precautions seriously enough because they've never experienced or witnessed the consequences. Your story could help prevent future incidents," she added quickly. "But I completely understand if you're not comfortable with that. It's entirely your choice." Sarah didn't respond immediately, uncertain how to feel about the request. On one hand, the thought of recounting her traumatic experience to strangers seemed daunting, potentially re-traumatizing. On the other hand, if her story could prevent someone else from going through what she had endured, wasn't there an obligation to share it? "Can I think about it?" she finally asked. "Of course," Officer Rodriguez assured her. "The sessions wouldn't begin until spring anyway, when visitor numbers start to increase again. Take all the time you need." After ending the call, Sarah stood at her apartment window, looking out at the winter landscape. A light dusting of snow had fallen overnight, covering the ground with a thin white blanket that would likely melt by afternoon. In the forest, she knew, the bear and its cubs were curled together in their den, conserving energy during the lean months, oblivious to the human world and its deliberations about their fate. The bears had been spared, allowed to continue their natural lives in the forest they called home. Sarah found herself genuinely glad of this outcome, despite everything. But what about her own life? Where did she go from here? The physical wounds were healing, leaving raised pink scars across her shoulders and upper back that would likely fade to white over time, but never disappear completely. The nerve damage in her left shoulder was improving gradually, though Marcus had warned her she might never regain 100% of her previous strength and mobility. The psychological wounds were less visible, but equally permanent. The nightmares less frequent now, but still present. The hypervigilance slightly less intrusive, but still lurking beneath the surface of her daily activities. Sarah had not returned to running yet, though her doctors had cleared her for moderate cardiovascular exercise. She had joined a gym instead, using the treadmill and elliptical machines, while carefully avoiding the windows that looked out on the forested hills surrounding the town. She told herself it was a practical decision, better to exercise indoors during the winter months, but she knew the real reason was fear. The thought of running on a forest trail again, even in a group, even with bear spray, filled her with a cold dread she couldn't quite shake. "You don't have to go back to the woods if you don't want to," Dr. Winters had told her during a recent session. "There's no rule that says you have to conquer every fear. Choosing different activities that don't trigger trauma responses is a perfectly valid coping strategy." But I loved those trails, Sarah had responded, feeling a sense of loss that went beyond the physical activity itself. The solitude, the connection with nature, it was my sanctuary. I don't want to let fear take that away from me permanently. Then we'll work toward reclaiming it, at whatever pace feels right for you, Dr. Winters had promised. But remember that healing isn't linear. There will be steps forward and steps back, and that's okay. Now, as December deepened and the year drew to a close, Sarah found herself at a crossroads. The bear was in its den and she was back at work part-time, gradually rebuilding her strength and her life. But there remained an unresolved question at the heart of her recovery. Would she find her way back to the forest trails that had once brought her such joy, or would fear keep her permanently on the sidelines, watching the wilderness from a safe distance? The answer, Sarah realized as she turned away from the window, wasn't something she needed to determine today. Recovery was a journey, not a destination, and she was still in the midst of it. For now, it was enough to acknowledge both her progress and her ongoing challenges, to celebrate how far she had come while recognizing how far she still had to go. That evening, Sarah made a decision. She called Officer Rodriguez and agreed to participate in the spring bear safety sessions. Sharing her story might help others avoid her fate, and perhaps the act of recounting it for a purpose beyond her own healing would help her integrate the experience more fully into her life narrative. It was a small step toward reclaiming agency in a situation that had left her feeling powerless, and for now, that seemed like enough. As winter settled over the Blue Ridge Mountains, Sarah continued her gradual recovery. The bears slept in their den, and she in her apartment, each healing in their own way, each preparing for whatever spring might bring. The attack had forever changed her, leaving both visible and invisible scars, but it hadn't defined her. She was more than the worst thing that had happened to her. She was still Sarah Jenkins, wounded but surviving, traumatized but healing, afraid but finding her courage one day at a time. Life continued, different than before, but still worth living. The forest would always be there waiting whenever she was ready to return, and the bear, following its natural instincts without malice or memory, would continue its wild existence, a reminder of the beautiful but sometimes dangerous world. Beyond human control, a world that Sarah had encountered in its rawest form and survived to tell the tale. As January gave way to February, Sarah found her strength returning more rapidly. Her physical therapy sessions became more challenging as Marcus pushed her recovering muscles and nerves to rebuild. The progress was evident not just in the clinical measurements of strength and range of motion, but in the everyday tasks that had once been impossible, reaching into high kitchen cabinets, carrying groceries, washing her hair without pain. Small victories, perhaps, but meaningful ones that marked her gradual return to independence. Work hours increased as well. By mid-February, Sarah was back to a full schedule, though still with some accommodations. She wore a supportive brace on her left shoulder during particularly demanding sessions, and her colleagues continued to step in for tasks requiring maximum strength. Her patients, many of whom were aware of what had happened to her, often expressed amazement at her recovery. "You understand what we're going through better than most therapists could," one patient told her after a challenging session. The young woman was recovering from a serious car accident that had left her with multiple fractures and nerve damage in her right arm. "You're not just telling us it gets better, you're showing us." Sarah hadn't considered this perspective before, that her own injuries might actually enhance her effectiveness as a therapist. She had worried that her limitations would make her less capable, less useful to her patients. But perhaps there was something valuable in having walked the difficult path of recovery herself, in knowing firsthand the frustration, pain, and small triumphs that marked the journey back from traumatic injury. As winter began to loosen its grip on the mountains, Sarah also made progress with Dr. Winters on the psychological aspects of her recovery. The nightmares had decreased to once or twice a week, rather than nightly occurrences, and she was gradually developing more effective strategies for managing her hypervigilance and anxiety. Through carefully structured exposure exercises, she had even reached the point where she could watch videos of black bears without experiencing a panic response, though actual encounters, even with dogs, still triggered significant anxiety. "Your brain is rewiring itself," Dr. Winters explained, "creating new neural pathways that incorporate the traumatic experience but don't allow it to dominate your responses. It takes time, but you're making excellent progress." One Sunday afternoon in early March, As the first hints of spring began to appear in the form of swelling buds on the trees and the occasional early crocus pushing through the last patches of snow, Sarah received an unexpected visit. She opened her apartment door to find Ranger Mike Dawson standing there in his off-duty clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, rather than his park service uniform. "Ranger Dawson," she said in surprise. "This is unexpected." "Mike, please," he said with a smile, "and I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit. I was in town and thought I'd check in, see how you're doing. I brought coffee." He held up a carrier with 2 cups from the local cafe. Sarah hesitated only briefly before inviting him in. Though they had spoken several times since the attack, mostly regarding the official report and the status of the bear, this was the first time he had visited her home. She was suddenly aware of the disheveled state of her apartment. Books and magazines scattered across the coffee table, a half-empty mug from that morning still sitting on the kitchen counter, laundry piled on the armchair waiting to be folded. "Sorry about the mess," she said, hastily clearing space on the sofa. "If I'd known I was having company..." "Please," Mike said, waving off her apology. "You should see my place, bachelor living at its finest." He handed her one of the coffee cups and took a seat in the now cleared armchair while she settled on the sofa. An awkward silence stretched between them for a moment before he spoke again. "So how are you really doing? And don't give me the official making good progress line I'm sure you've perfected for concerned friends and relatives." Sarah found herself smiling at his directness. "The truth, some days are better than others. Physically, I'm probably at about 80% of where I was before. Mentally," she shrugged, "that's harder to quantify. Better than I was. Not as good as I want to be." Mike nodded, seeming to appreciate her honesty. "That's to be expected. Recovery from something like this isn't linear. That's what my therapist keeps telling me," Sarah said, taking a sip of her coffee, a latte with an extra shot, she noted with appreciation. "Smart therapist," Mike commented. "I've been a ranger for 15 years, seen quite a few wildlife encounters gone wrong. It always takes time to process, especially when it's something as primal as a predator attack." Sarah studied him more carefully. Though they had interacted several times since the attack, this was the first conversation that felt personal rather than professional. Mike was probably in his early 40s, she guessed, with the lean, weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. Light crow's feet radiated from the corners of his eyes, and a few strands of gray were visible in his otherwise brown hair. His hands, wrapped around his coffee cup, showed the calluses and small scars of practical physical work. "Have you ever been attacked?" she asked, curious about his personal experience with wildlife encounters. "Not by a bear," he replied. "Had a close call with a bull elk during rutting season once. My own fault for getting too close while trying to move some hikers back to a safe distance. And I've had to help with the aftermath of several attacks over the years, though yours was one of the more serious." Sarah nodded, wondering what had prompted this visit. As if reading her thoughts, Mike leaned forward slightly. "Officer Rodriguez mentioned you've agreed to participate in the bear safety sessions this spring. I wanted to thank you for that. It takes courage to revisit a traumatic experience, especially in front of strangers." "I'm still not sure what I'm going to say," Sarah admitted, "or if I'll actually be able to go through with it when the time comes. Whatever you can share will be valuable," Mike assured her. "But that's not the only reason I stopped by." He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "The bears, the mother and cubs from your encounter, they're starting to show signs of emerging from their den. Our wildlife cams picked up some activity last week. With the early warm spell we've been having, they're waking up sooner than expected." Sarah felt a sudden tightness in her chest, a quickening of her pulse. "Why are you telling me this?" Mike set his coffee down and leaned forward, his expression serious. "Because I'm leading a small monitoring expedition to check on them tomorrow. Very limited. Just me, Officer Rodriguez, and a wildlife biologist from the university. We'll be keeping our distance, using telephoto lenses and directional microphones to observe without disturbing them." He paused. "I thought you might want to come along." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to go into the forest to look for the bear that nearly killed me? Are you serious?" Mike held up his hands, palms out. "Hear me out. This would be completely controlled. We'd stay at least 100 yards from the den site, well, within the safety zone. We'll all be carrying bear spray and other deterrents, and we wouldn't be on foot the whole way. We'd use park service vehicles on the fire roads to get close, then hike in just the last quarter mile." "Why would I want to do this?" Sarah asked genuinely. Baffled by the suggestion, Mike's expression softened. "Because sometimes confronting the source of our fear in a controlled, safe environment can be powerful. I've seen it work with other attack survivors." He leaned back, giving her space. It's just an offer, Sarah. You can absolutely say no, and I won't think any less of you. In fact, most people would probably say I'm crazy for suggesting it. Sarah was silent for a long moment, turning the unexpected proposal over in her mind. Her first instinct was an emphatic no. The very thought of being in the forest again, much less near the bear that had attacked her, sent a spike of anxiety through her body. But beneath that immediate reaction, there was something else. A tiny flicker of curiosity, even possibility. "I'll think about it," she finally said, surprising herself. "I'm not saying yes, but I'm not saying no either. I need to consider." Mike nodded, seemingly pleased with this response. "That's fair. The expedition leaves at 7 a.m. tomorrow from the Swift Run Gap entrance station. If you decide to come, just show up. If not, no questions asked or explanations needed." They finished their coffee, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. The early signs of spring in the mountains, the increasing visitor numbers the park was already seeing on weekends, the local efforts to improve trail marking in some of the more remote areas. Mike was easy to talk to, knowledgeable without being condescending, and genuinely interested in her perspective as both a park user and an attack survivor. After he left, Sarah paced her apartment, her mind churning with thoughts about his unexpected offer. Was he right? Could facing the bear safely from a distance help her process what had happened, or would it simply re-traumatize her, undoing the progress she had made over the past months? She called Dr. Winters, catching the psychologist, on her day off but knowing she wouldn't mind the professional consultation. "It's an interesting proposition," Dr. Winters said after Sarah explained Mike's offer. "There's certainly clinical support for exposure therapy and trauma treatment, gradually confronting triggers in a controlled, safe environment to reduce their power over you. But this seems extreme," Sarah countered. "Going from watching videos of bears to potentially seeing the actual bear that attacked me, isn't that too big a jump?" "It would be if you were going alone, or if the situation wasn't as controlled as Ranger Dawson described," Dr. Winters replied thoughtfully. "But with professionals present, appropriate safety measures in place, and the distance he mentioned, it could be a valuable experience." She paused. "The question is whether you feel ready for it. This needs to be your decision, based on your assessment of your own readiness, not pressure from others or some external timeline for recovery." Sarah considered this. "A part of me thinks I should do it, that I'll regret it if I don't take this opportunity, but another part is terrified at the very idea." "Both reactions are completely valid," Dr. Winters assured her. "Fear doesn't mean you're not ready. It's a normal response to a situation that your brain associates with danger. The key is whether you feel you can manage that fear within the parameters of this controlled exposure." After ending the call, Sarah continued to wrestle with the decision throughout the evening. She found herself standing at her window, looking out toward the mountains where the park spread across the ridgelines, mountains that had once represented adventure and solace, but now evoked more complicated emotions. By the time she went to bed, she still hadn't made a firm decision. She set her alarm for 5:30 a.m., early enough to make it to the Swift Run Gap entrance by 7 if she decided to go, but told herself she was under no obligation to make that drive when morning came. Sleep was restless, punctuated by dreams that weren't quite nightmares, but were filled with tension, forests that shifted and changed as she walked through them, trails that doubled back on themselves, shadows that might or might not be, bears moving in the periphery of her vision. She woke shortly before her alarm, the gray light of early dawn filtering through her curtains. For several minutes she lay motionless, listening to the early morning sounds of her apartment building coming to life, the muffled sounds of a shower running in the unit above, a car starting in the parking lot, the ping of her refrigerator's ice maker dropping a fresh batch of cubes. Simple, everyday sounds that grounded her in the normal, the safe. Then, with a deep breath, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood. She would go. Not out of bravery, necessarily, but out of a need to reclaim some control over her narrative, to be more than just a victim in her own story. She dressed quickly in layers appropriate for the mountain. Weather, thermal underlayer, flannel shirt, lightweight down jacket, sturdy hiking pants, and the waterproof hiking boots she hadn't worn since the attack. In her kitchen, she filled a thermos with coffee and packed a small bag with water, protein, bars, and her medications. After a moment's hesitation, she added the canister of bear spray she had purchased after the attack but never had occasion to use. Its weight in her bag was simultaneously reassuring and disturbing. The drive to Swift Run Gap took about 20 minutes, the roads nearly empty in the early morning. As she approached the park entrance, Sarah felt her anxiety building. her hands tightening on the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. She forced herself to take slow, deep breaths, using the grounding techniques Dr. Winters had taught her, naming 5 things she could see, 4 she could touch, 3 she could hear, 2 she could smell, 1 she could taste. The park entrance station was unmanned at this early hour, but she could see 2 Park Service SUVs and a Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources truck parked in the small lot beyond. As she pulled in beside them, Mike emerged from one of the SUVs, raising a hand in greeting. Officer Rodriguez and a woman Sarah didn't recognize, presumably the wildlife biologist, stood nearby, consulting a map spread across the hood of the truck. "You came," Mike said as she approached, his voice neutral, neither surprised nor congratulatory, simply acknowledging her presence. Sarah nodded, not quite trusting her voice yet. The familiar smells of the park, pine resin, damp earth, the slightly musty scent of fallen leaves, washed over her, triggering a complex mix of emotions. Nostalgia, appreciation, anxiety, fear. "Sarah, good to see you again," Officer Rodriguez said, looking up from the map. "This is Dr. Eleanor Chen from the University of Virginia's Wildlife Conservation Department. She's been tracking this bear family as part of a larger study on black bear population dynamics in the park." The biologist, a petite woman with short-cropped, grey hair and wire-rimmed glasses, offered a firm handshake. "Ms. Jenkins, thank you for coming. Your perspective will be valuable to our understanding of this bear's behavior patterns." Sarah was surprised by this comment. "My perspective? I'm not sure what you mean." Dr. Chen's expression was direct, but not unkind. "You've had an encounter with this specific bear that goes beyond the usual observational data we collect. Your experience, while traumatic, and I don't minimize that, provides insights into her defensive behaviors, threat responses, and cub protection instincts that we rarely document so directly." There was something refreshing about Dr. Chen's matter-of-fact approach. She neither treated Sarah as a victim deserving pity, nor as a curiosity to be studied, but rather as someone with valuable information to contribute to scientific understanding. "I'm still not sure why I'm here," Sarah admitted, looking between the 3 professionals. "What exactly am I supposed to do during this monitoring expedition?" "Nothing in particular," Mike assured her. "This is primarily for your benefit, not ours. You'll observe from a safe distance, ask any questions you have, and leave whenever you feel you've seen enough, even if that's 5 minutes after we arrive at the observation point." Sarah nodded, slightly reassured. "And you're certain we'll be at a safe distance?" 100 yards minimum, Officer Rodriguez confirmed. "We'll be downwind, partially concealed, and with multiple escape routes identified in advance. All of us are carrying bear spray and other deterrents, and we'll have radio contact with the park headquarters throughout." The detailed safety precautions helped calm Sarah's anxiety somewhat. This wasn't a reckless wilderness encounter, but a carefully planned scientific observation, with multiple layers of protection. "Okay," she said, "let's do this." They divided into 2 vehicles, Sarah riding with Mike in the lead SUV, while Officer Rodriguez and Dr. Chen followed in the second. The fire road they took was rough and narrow, winding up the eastern slope of the mountain through dense forest. Sarah gripped the door handle as they bounced over ruts and rocks, the familiar terrain of the park passing outside her window. "You doing okay?" Mike asked after they had been driving for about 15 minutes. Sarah nodded. "So far. Ask me again when we're actually on foot." Mike smiled. "Fair enough. We've got about 5 more minutes in the vehicle, then a quarter-mile hike to the observation point. The den is on a south-facing slope in a rocky area with good drainage, classic black bear den site." "Have you seen them emerge yet?" Sarah asked. "Just the mother so far," Mike replied. "She's been out a few times in the past week, probably, testing conditions and maybe doing some preliminary foraging. The cubs haven't been observed outside the den yet." Soon they reached a small clearing where the fire road ended. Mike parked, and Officer Rodriguez pulled in beside them. They gathered their equipment, binoculars, a spotting scope on a tripod, the directional microphone Dr. Chen had mentioned, and their personal gear. Before setting out on the trail, Mike reviewed the safety protocols once more, making sure everyone understood the procedures for retreat if necessary. The hiking portion was short, but challenging for Sarah, not physically. Her recovery had progressed far enough that the moderate terrain didn't tax her strength but psychologically. With each step deeper into the forest, her anxiety increased. The sounds of the woods, once so familiar and comforting, now triggered heightened alertness. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf caused her to tense, her hand instinctively moving toward the bear spray in her jacket pocket. Mike, walking beside her, seemed to notice her growing unease. "We're almost there," he said quietly. "Just over this next rise. We'll stop short of the ridge to keep our silhouettes from standing out against the skyline." The observation point turned out to be a small natural blind created by a fallen oak tree and a cluster of mountain laurel bushes. From this position, they had a clear view of the opposite slope about 150 yards away, where a jumble of rocks and boulders created natural crevices, ideal for a bear's winter den. Dr. Chen set up the spotting scope, while Officer Rodriguez used binoculars to scan the area. "Movement at the den entrance," she reported after a few minutes. "I think it's the mother." Sarah's heart rate accelerated as Dr. Chen adjusted the spotting scope and then stepped back, gesturing for her to look. With shaking hands, Sarah knelt behind the scope and peered through the eyepiece. At first, she saw only rocks and patches of lingering snow in the shadows between them. Then movement caught her eye, a dark shape emerging from a crevice in the rock face. The bear. Even from this distance, Sarah recognized her immediately, the large female with the distinctive white chest patch. The bear moved with a ponderous grace, stretching after the confined months in the den, her black coat appearing slightly dull after the winter, but still glossy in the patches where sunlight struck it. She raised her head, sniffing the air, her powerful shoulders hunched as she surveyed her surroundings. Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat, her body responding to the sight with a surge of primal fear. But there was something else too, a sense of awe at the animal's power and presence, a grudging respect for the fierce protective instinct that had driven their violent encounter. This was no monster, no malevolent force that had targeted her. Specifically, this was simply a wild animal, a mother protecting her young in the only way she knew how. "She's beautiful," Sarah whispered, surprising herself with the admission. "Yes, she is," Dr. Chen agreed. "A healthy adult female, approximately 7 years old at the prime of her life. She's successfully raised at least 3 litters of cubs, contributing significantly to the park's bear population." As they watched, the bear moved away from the den entrance to investigate something at the base of a nearby tree, probably checking for early spring growth or insects. Her movements were deliberate and efficient, conserving the energy she would need after months of minimal food intake. "The cubs should emerge soon," Officer Rodriguez said. "They're usually quite active once they start coming out of the den, eager to explore after being confined all winter." Sure enough, within minutes, a small black head poked out of the den entrance, then another. The cubs, now much larger than when Sarah had encountered them in October, tumbled out onto the rocks, their movements clumsy but energetic after the long winter rest. They were about the size of medium dogs now, their winter coats thick and fluffy, their ears seeming slightly too large for their heads. The mother bear immediately returned to the den area, vocalizing softly to her cubs, a series of grunts and huffs that carried faintly across the distance, separating the observation point from the den site. The cubs responded with high-pitched sounds of their own, what Sarah might have described as whines if they had been domestic dogs. "She's communicating with them," Dr. Chen explained, her voice low to avoid carrying, reassuring them that it's safe to come out, but also establishing boundaries for their movement. She'll keep them close to the den for the first few days after emergence, gradually expanding their range as they grow stronger and more coordinated. Sarah continued watching through the spotting scope, transfixed by the family dynamics playing out before her. The cubs wrestled with each other while the mother foraged, nearby occasionally glancing up to check their location. At one point, one of the cubs strayed too far from the den, and the mother immediately vocalized a sharp, authoritative sound. The cub froze, then scampered back to a more acceptable distance. "Classic boundary reinforcement," Dr. Chen murmured, making notes in a small waterproof notebook. "She's establishing the safe perimeter for this stage of development." They observed for nearly an hour, Dr. Chen recording the bear's behaviors and movements, while Officer Rodriguez monitored the surrounding forest for any signs of other wildlife or approaching hikers, though this area was well off the marked trails. Mike maintained radio contact with park headquarters, providing periodic updates on their location and status. Throughout the observation, Sarah remained focused on the bear family, her initial fear gradually giving way to a complex mix of emotions: respect, fascination, lingering anxiety, and something that might even be termed reconciliation. She was seeing the bear not as the instrument of her trauma, but as a wild animal living according to its nature, neither good nor evil, but simply being what evolution had shaped it to be over millions of years. When the bears finally retreated back into the den, The mother perhaps deciding that enough outside time had been had for the cubs' first major excursion, Sarah finally stepped back from the spotting scope. She realized her legs were cramped from maintaining the same position for so long, and her hands were cold despite her gloves, but her mind felt clearer than it had in months, as if some internal knot had begun to loosen. "Ready to head back?" Mike asked, studying her expression with what seemed like professional assessment combined with personal concern. Sarah nodded. "Yes, I think I've seen what I needed to see." The hike back to the vehicles passed more easily than the journey in. Sarah found herself noticing details of the forest she had missed earlier. The first tiny wildflowers pushing through the leaf litter, the bright green buds on the maple trees, a piloted woodpecker working industriously on a dead snag. The woods were coming alive again after winter's dormancy, just as the bears were emerging from their den. As they drove back toward the park entrance, Sarah was quiet, processing the experience. Mike didn't press her to talk, seeming to understand her need for internal reflection. Only when they were approaching the exit did he speak. "So what are you thinking?" he asked, his tone casual but his glance toward her indicating genuine interest in her response. Sarah considered the question carefully. "I'm thinking that I needed to see her as she is, a wild animal, not a monster from my nightmares. I'm thinking that what happened was terrible but not personal, and I'm thinking that maybe someday I might be able to come back to these trails again." Mike nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "That sounds like progress." "To me, it's not some magical cure," Sarah clarified. "I still have a lot of work to do, but seeing her in this context, at a safe distance, with preparation and support, it helps put things in perspective." "That's all we were hoping for," Mike said. "Not a miracle, just a step in the right direction." When they reached the entrance station, now manned by a ranger for the day shift, Sarah thanked Mike, Officer Rodriguez, and Dr. Chen for including her in the expedition. As she walked back to her own car, she felt a subtle shift in her perception of herself, no longer just a victim of a bear attack, but a survivor who was actively engaged in her own recovery, making difficult choices that moved her forward, rather than keeping her trapped in fear. She drove home with the windows partly down, letting the cool spring air fill the car. The mountains, visible in her rear-view mirror as she descended toward the valley, seemed less threatening somehow, more like the old friends they had once been. Not entirely safe, perhaps. She had learned too well the dangers they could harbor, but not implacably hostile either. That night, for the first time in months, Sarah slept without nightmares. The bear appeared in her dreams, but not as a charging aggressor. Instead, she saw it as she had that morning, a mother tending to her cubs, a wild creature in its natural habitat, separate from the human world and its judgments. In the weeks that followed, Sarah continued her physical and psychological recovery with renewed determination. Her strength and mobility improved steadily, though her left shoulder would likely never regain 100% of its pre-attack capabilities. She adapted her physical therapy techniques to accommodate this new reality, developing workarounds for the limitations she now faced. The bear safety sessions organized by the Park Service began in April, coinciding with the start of the peak visitor season. Sarah participated as she had promised, sharing her experience with groups of hikers, campers, and park employees. She found that telling her story became easier with repetition, the narrative gradually transforming from a raw, traumatic recounting to a structured educational tool that might help others avoid her fate. "The most important thing I learned," she would tell the attentive audiences, "is that bears aren't out to get us. They're not monsters or villains. They're wild animals with their own needs and instincts. My encounter happened because I accidentally came between a mother and her cubs, one of the most dangerous wildlife situations possible, but it wasn't the bear's fault, and it wasn't really my fault either. It was an unfortunate intersection of human and bear behavior that could have been prevented with better preparation and awareness." She explained the mistakes she had made, running alone on a less traveled trail, not making enough noise to alert wildlife to her presence, not carrying bear spray, and most critically, turning to run when the bear charged. She also described what she had done right, calling for help quickly, knowing to play dead when fighting back didn't work, and cooperating fully with her rescuers and medical team. The sessions were well received, with many attendees approaching Sarah afterward to thank her for her candor and courage in sharing such a difficult experience. Park staff noticed an uptick in visitors purchasing bear spray and asking informed questions about wildlife safety, suggesting that Sarah's first-hand account was having the desired impact on visitor behavior. May arrived, bringing warmer temperatures, and explosions of wildflowers along the mountain trails. Sarah had progressed to hiking in less remote areas of the park, always with companions, and always with bear spray accessible at her hip. She hadn't yet returned to running the trails, but she no longer ruled out the possibility for the future. 1. Evening in late May, nearly 8 months after the attack, Sarah received a text message from Mike Dawson. Off duty tomorrow. Planning a moderate hike on Rip Rap Trail. Good company, beautiful views, and I always pack extra bear spray. Interested? Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, recognizing it for what it was, not just an invitation to a hike, but a potential step towards something more personal. She and Mike had stayed in contact since the monitoring expedition, their professional relationship gradually evolving into a friendship that might be developing into something deeper. He had attended several of her bear safety presentations, offering support and additional information when needed. They had shared coffee a few more times and once dinner at a small restaurant in Elkton. What time? She texted back, making her decision. And yes, I'll bring my own bear spray. Never can have too much. His response came quickly. 7 a.m. at the trailhead, bringing breakfast, and yes to the extra bear spray, better safe than sorry. Sarah smiled as she set her phone down. 8 months ago, a bear attack had nearly ended her life and had certainly changed its trajectory forever. The physical and emotional scars would always remain, testaments to the wild, unpredictable nature of the world and her own vulnerability within it. But they were not the end of her story, merely a difficult chapter in a narrative that continued to unfold in ways she couldn't have anticipated. Tomorrow she would hike in the mountains again, in the company of someone who understood both her trauma and her gradual healing. She would carry bear spray and remain vigilant, but she would also stop to admire the wildflowers, listen to the birdsong, and feel the sun on her face. She would reclaim a piece of what the attack had taken from her, not fearlessness, which she now recognized as dangerous naivety, but the ability to find joy in the natural world, despite its inherent risks. Somewhere in those same mountains, the bear that had attacked her would be leading her cubs through the spring forest, teaching them to forage, to recognize dangers, to survive in a world that included creatures like Sarah, humans who sometimes ventured into bear territory, creating the potential for conflict neither species truly desired. The bear would not remember Sarah, would not recognize her if their paths ever crossed again. The attack had been a momentary instinctive response to a perceived threat, not the beginning of an enmity or a vendetta. The bear had simply been a bear, acting according to its nature in defense of its young. Understanding this had been a crucial part of Sarah's healing process. The bear was not her enemy, not an evil force that had targeted her specifically. It was simply a wild creature she had been unfortunate enough to encounter in the wrong circumstances, a powerful reminder of the untamed aspects of nature that humans, for all their technological advantages, could never fully control or predict. That night, as she prepared her hiking gear for the morning's expedition, Sarah paused to look at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She turned slightly to see the scars that curved across her shoulders and upper back, raised pinkish marks that would fade over time but never disappear completely. Battle scars, some might call them, though that implied an adversarial relationship Sarah no longer felt with the bear or the forest. They were, perhaps more accurately, survival scars. Physical reminders of a day when nature had tested her and found her equal to the challenge. She would carry them for the rest of her life, these marks on her skin that told a story of trauma, resilience, and recovery. But they would not define her, not limit her, not keep her from returning to the wilderness she had once loved and was learning to love again, albeit with greater wisdom and respect for its power. Tomorrow's hike would be another step in that ongoing journey, a journey not just along mountain trails but toward a new understanding of herself and her place in the wild world that had both wounded her and helped heal her. The scars would remain, but so would the mountains, the forests, the flowing streams, and the creatures that called them home, including the bears, following their ancient rhythms of life, neither malevolent nor benevolent, but simply profoundly wild. And in that wildness, Sarah had found not just trauma, but also transformation, a hard-won wisdom about the complex relationship between humans and the natural world, about vulnerability and strength, about fear and its gradual mastery. The bear had walked away after the attack, leaving her broken but alive on the forest floor. Now it was her turn to walk forward, carrying the experience with her, but not allowing it to determine where her path might lead.